Hello beautiful people. Welcome to Super Harry. In today's episode, we explore, what if Triwizard magic screamed true mate detected and Fleur was revealed as Harry's destined pair. Hit like, subscribe, and join our community of story lovers. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Second Flame. The Goblet of Fire was supposed to be done. That was the thing nobody talked about afterward, how final it had felt, how complete, when Victor Crumb's name had sailed out on a ribbon of flame and the old magic had seemed to exhale and settle back into itself like a fire burning low. Cedric Amos Diggory, Fleur Isabel Delacour, Victor Crumb. 3 names. 3 champions. The goblet's light had faded to a dull ember orange and Dumbledore had opened his mouth to speak, and that should have been the end of it. Instead the fire turned white. Not the warm white of sunlight, something colder and more absolute, like the light at the center of a struck match before the color catches. Every candle in the great hall stuttered. The enchanted ceiling, which had been showing a calm October night, flickered and went briefly, impossibly dark. Several first-years screamed. Nearly headless Nick passed through a Hufflepuff student in his haste to back away from the staff table. Dumbledore froze. That alone was enough to stop Harry's heart. In 4 years he had never seen Albus Dumbledore freeze. Not when a troll had been let into the school, not when a basilisk had been petrifying students, not when a supposedly dead dark wizard had been found living in the back of a teacher's skull. The old man had an answer for everything, a calm measured response draped in gentle authority, and watching him go absolutely still with his mouth open and his half-moon spectacles catching that impossible white light was more frightening than anything else that happened in the next 30 seconds. The goblet convulsed. That was the only word for it. The stone basin shuddered on its plinth like something alive and unhappy, and a fourth slip of parchment tore itself free of the flame and tumbled upward in a curl of smoke. Dumbledore caught it. His fingers closed around it reflexively, the way you'd catch a thrown knife. He stared at it. The hall was so quiet Harry could hear Ron breathing beside him, short, rapid, confused breaths. "Harry James Potter," said Dumbledore. The silence broke completely. It broke like a window, sudden, sharp, and leaving edges everywhere. Sound rushed in from all directions, the Durmstrang students erupting in outrage, the Beauxbatons girls rising from their seats in a cascade of pale blue silk, the Hogwarts students fragmenting into 100 overlapping arguments about whether this was legal, whether Harry had done it himself, whether it was some kind of prank. Percy Weasley was already on his feet. Professor McGonagall had gone the precise grey-white color of old parchment. Harry didn't move. He was aware of Ron saying something directly into his ear, something loud and urgent, and he heard the shape of the words without absorbing their meaning. He was looking at the goblet. Because it wasn't done. The white fire hadn't faded. It was pulsing, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat, and it was getting brighter, and somewhere deep in Harry's chest, not in his mind, not in any thought he was having, he felt something stir. Something warm and directionless and completely alien, like being nudged awake by a sound you can't identify. The goblet convulsed again. This time the sound it made was audible. Not a voice exactly, more like the harmonic you get when a very large bell is struck, felt in the sternum rather than heard with the ears. The flame shot upward 6 feet and the white light became blinding, and every person in the great hall threw an arm up to shield their eyes. Every person except 2. Harry kept his eyes open because he couldn't look away. Across the hall, standing at the Beauxbatons table with silver hair catching that impossible light, Fleur Delacour kept hers open too. He didn't know how he knew she was looking at him, he couldn't see her eyes clearly at this distance, but he knew it with the same bone-deep certainty that told him sometimes when someone was standing directly behind him, the kind of knowing that bypassed thought entirely. Then the goblet spoke. It didn't use words, exactly, but it used something language adjacent, something that carved meaning directly into the mind in the way that Parseltongue carved meaning from sound. Every single person in the great hall heard it differently, Harry would learn later. Some heard it as a low voice, some as a high one, some as nothing at all but a sudden absolute understanding deposited into their brains without their permission. What they all agreed on afterward was what it said. True mate detected. Harry James Potter. Fleur Isabel Delacour. The bond is witnessed. The bond is sealed. Then the flame went out entirely and the hall plunged into a moment of pure darkness before every candle, all at once, blazed back to life. In the sudden ordinary warmth and light of 1,000 candles, surrounded by 500 people all making noise at the same time, Harry Potter and Fleur Delacour looked at each other across the great hall. She looked, he thought, as furious as he felt. What happened next was chaos organized into the shape of authority. Dumbledore was moving before the echo of that announcement had fully faded, cutting through the noise with his wand raised and his voice amplified to fill every corner of the hall. He said the tournament rules required the selected champions to come forward, and he said it with the particular tone that meant he was using the word required as a polite substitute for now, immediately, without argument. He said the champions should go through the door behind the staff table and that the other students should remain seated, and he said both of these things while already walking, already moving toward the door himself, already in control of the narrative. 3 of the 4 champions moved. Cedric Diggory stood up from the Hufflepuff table with the careful dignity of someone who was deeply confused but unwilling to show it. Victor Crumb rose from the Durmstrang seats like a boulder deciding to stand, massive and impassive, dark eyes tracking across the hall without hurry. Fleur Delacour stepped away from the Beauxbatons table and she was already halfway across the room before the movement fully registered, moving through the chaos with the particular quality of someone who had learned to move through crowds as though they weren't there. Harry sat still. Harry, Hermione said, on his left. Her hand found his arm. Harry, you have to, I heard. Then you need to, I know. He stood up. The Gryffindor table around him had split into 2 camps, the ones looking at him with the open-mouthed expression of people watching a disaster unfold, and the ones looking at him with the narrowed eyes of people who had already decided he'd engineered this himself. Neither camp did anything useful. Ron was somewhere in the middle, looking between Harry's face and the door with an expression that hadn't resolved into anything coherent yet. Harry pushed his chair back and walked toward the door. He didn't hurry. He wasn't entirely sure why. Something about the moment, the stairs, the noise, the feeling in his chest that still hadn't identified itself, made hurrying feel wrong. Made it feel like an admission. He went through the door. The room beyond was a small antechamber off the great hall, stone-walled and lit by several wall-mounted torches that cast everything in warm amber. A fire burned in a large fireplace on the far wall, deep red and completely ordinary. Cedric was standing near it with his arms crossed in what Harry recognized as a "I'm trying to look calmer than I feel" pose. Crumb was in the corner doing an impeccable impression of a statue. Fleur was standing in the exact center of the room, her arms at her sides, and she was looking at the door when Harry came through it as though she'd been watching for him specifically. Their eyes met for the second time that night. The warm directionless thing in his chest flickered. She looked away first. "Ah," said Dumbledore, from somewhere behind Harry. He'd come in simultaneously, Harry realized, along with half the staff, McGonagall, Snape, Moody with his distinctive uneven step, and 2 adults Harry didn't recognize who must have come with the visiting schools. One was a tall woman in silk robes the color of deep water, silver hair swept up in an architectural arrangement of pins. This would be Madame Maxime, headmistress of Beauxbatons, which Harry registered because she was the only person in the room nearly tall enough to meet Dumbledore's eye. The other was a man Harry didn't know, square-jawed and rigidly upright in the way of someone who believed posture was a moral position, who turned out to be Karkaroff. "Ah," Dumbledore said again, and it was the second "ah" that was different from the first, the one that contained something Harry couldn't quite read, surprise, possibly, or something that wanted to be surprise but was too controlled to fully become it. "Well. Here we are." "Here we are," said Karkaroff, and his voice had the careful quality of someone who was deciding how angry to be while still gathering information. "Albus, I want an explanation for whatever that was, and I want it immediately." "As do I," said Madame Maxime, and her voice was deep and resonant in a way that suggested she didn't need to raise it to fill any room she'd ever stood in. She was looking at Harry in a way he'd been looked at before, assessingly, the way people looked at things they were deciding whether to be concerned about. Then she looked at Fleur, and something in her expression shifted into something more complicated. Not concern exactly. More like recognition. Fleur. How do you feel? Angry, Fleur said, precise and immediate, in an accent that Harry had expected to find difficult and discovered he could follow perfectly, every word clear as struck glass. I feel angry, madam. Yes. I imagine you do. Can someone, said Cedric, with the particular determination of someone who has decided that if the adults won't address the obvious thing, he will, explain what just happened. Because I'm fairly sure I heard what I heard, and I'm fairly sure that's impossible. But I'd like to be told it's impossible by someone who actually knows. Nobody said it was impossible. That silence had a shape to it. It settled into the room and nobody claimed it, and Harry watched every adult face and noted the ones that weren't surprised enough. Dumbledore, who had his hands clasped behind his back and was looking at the fire with the expression he got when he was composing something. McGonagall, who looked genuinely shaken, which Harry found oddly reassuring. Moody, who was watching the room with his magical eye spinning in its socket with a speed that suggested he'd turned the paranoia up to maximum. Snape, who was looking at Harry with an expression that on a different face might have been called calculating. It's not impossible, said Dumbledore, finally. He turned from the fire. It's extraordinary. It hasn't happened in recorded history during a Triwizard tournament. But the Goblet of Fire is not simply a selection mechanism. It's a very old piece of magic, bound to very old traditions, and among those traditions, predating the tournament by several centuries, is a recognition function. He paused. The goblet was originally a bonding instrument. A truth seeker used at ancient magical contracts and ceremonies. The tournament's founders repurposed it, but they couldn't remove what it fundamentally was. You're saying it revealed a Vila-Mate bond, said Madame Maxime, and it wasn't a question. I'm saying it revealed something older than the Vila-Mate bond as the Beauxbatons tradition understands it, yes. Something that, I am not a Vila, said Fleur, and the words landed like a set of keys dropped onto stone, flat and precise. I am 1/4 Vila. This kind of bond was not supposed to be possible for someone of my heritage. The scholars are very clear that the scholars, said Dumbledore, gently, were working with incomplete information. As scholars often are. Fleur's jaw tightened. She didn't say anything else. Harry had been listening to all of this with the careful attention he developed over 4 years of adults talking about him in his presence as though he wasn't there, and he'd been watching Fleur in his peripheral vision, and he'd been aware the whole time of that warmth in his chest that he was fairly certain wasn't coming from him. It was foreign. It lived slightly to the left of where his own feelings lived, if feelings could be said to live in specific locations, which he'd never considered before tonight. What does it actually do? He said. Every adult in the room looked at him as though they'd forgotten he was there. Practical question, Cedric murmured, in a tone of mild approval. The bond, Harry said, addressing Dumbledore because addressing the room felt theatrical. Not the history of it. Not whether the scholars got it wrong. What does it do, right now, to both of us? Dumbledore looked at him with those blue eyes that always seemed to be taking in something that wasn't visible to anyone else. The short answer, he said, is that it creates a connection. Emotional resonance. Initially, you'll be aware of each other's stronger feelings as a sort of secondary sensation. In proximity, it will intensify. Over time and can we undo it? Fleur asked. No, said Madame Maxime, and something in her voice suggested she'd already known the answer and had been hoping to be wrong. With respect, said Fleur, and the French accent made respect sound like a word being filed into a very tight space, I was not asking you. I was asking Dumbledore. The bonding was witnessed and sealed by the goblet itself, said Dumbledore. Breaking it would require, he paused, and in the pause Harry heard the specific silence of an adult choosing how much truth to offer. It would cause significant harm to both of you. It is not something I would advise. What about the tournament? said Karkaroff, who had apparently decided that enough time had been spent on the personal and he wanted to return to the institutional. For champions, Albus. The rules are clear, the rules, said Moody, speaking for the first time, his voice like boots on gravel, have already been broken once tonight. Potter's name came from that cup, and unless someone in this room is prepared to explain how a 14-year-old boy circumvented ancient binding magic that 3 other champions, their schools, and the ministry all failed to circumvent, I'd suggest we save the rules conversation for when we've sorted out the magic one. The silence that followed this was of a different quality than the previous one. Harry noted that nobody took up the invitation to explain how he'd done it. He noted this because it meant none of the adults in this room fully believed he had, which was something, and also because it meant they were all carrying their suspicions about who had done it privately, without committing. Which was something else. For champions, then, said Karkaroff, pulling his coat closer. And the bond. Both are facts. I suggest we address them as such. Agreed, said Madame Maxime. She looked at Fleur again, something protective and resigned in equal measure in the line of her shoulders. Fleur, chérie, I am fine, Fleur said, and it had the quality of a door closing politely. Madame Maxime accepted this the way you accept closed doors when you know the person behind them. She turned back to the adults. The conversation shifted into logistics. The tournament would proceed with 4 champions, the point system would be adjusted, the ministry would be informed in the morning. Harry stopped listening at roughly the point where Karkaroff started talking about documentation and let the words wash past while he thought. The bond was real. That was the first fact. The goblet had announced it in front of 500 people, which meant he couldn't unknow it and nobody else could either. The second fact was that he could feel it right now, a warmth in his sternum that wasn't his, and when he paid attention to its texture it felt like anger, not blind anger, more the kind of sustained focused anger that comes from something being done to you without your consent, and yeah, he understood that completely. The third fact was that Fleur Delacour was the most composed-looking furious person he'd ever been in a room with, and she was standing 12 feet away from him, not looking in his direction with an intentionality that suggested she was extremely aware of where he was. The adults talked for another 20 minutes and Harry said nothing else, and neither did Fleur, and eventually they were both told to return to their dormitories, that further discussions would happen tomorrow, that they should try to rest. Harry nodded. Fleur said, of course, in a voice that made it clear she was agreeing with the words and not the sentiment. They filed out. Cedric caught Harry's arm at the door. For what it's worth, Cedric said, quietly, I believe you didn't put your name in. He paused. About the other thing, if you want to talk, I don't actually know anything useful, but I'm a decent listener. He gave Harry a small, genuine smile and went out. Harry stood in the doorway for a moment. Potter. He turned. Fleur was behind him, and they were alone in the antechamber now. The adults had all moved back into the great hall or dispersed into the corridors, and the small room had gone quiet except for the fire. Close up, the Vila heritage was more visible. Not in an aggressive way, not in the way that made people stupid in her presence. Harry had noticed during the Beauxbatons' arrival that the effect on people was strongest when she wasn't paying attention to them, and right now she was paying very specific attention to him, and that seemed to function as a kind of grounding. She was watching him with gray eyes that were currently the color of the sky before a storm, and her expression was not what he'd expected. He'd expected continued fury. What he was getting was something more like frank, direct, unsentimental assessment. I didn't do this, Harry said. I know you didn't, she said. Not warmly, but as a statement of fact, the kind you don't attach feelings to. Someone put your name in the goblet to force you into the tournament. We can discuss whether that same person intended the bond declaration. My instinct is they did not. The bond magic is older and stranger than anything a tournament manipulator would want to introduce. Harry stared at her. Yeah. That's exactly what I was, you were thinking the same thing. It wasn't a question either. I could tell. A few seconds ago, while they were talking. Whatever this bond does with emotions, it apparently also does something with focused thought when we're in proximity. She tilted her head fractionally. That will be inconvenient. Deeply, Harry agreed. Something crossed her face that wasn't quite a smile, more the precursor to one, the muscular arrangement that happens a half-second before the decision to smile is made. I was told when I arrived that Harry Potter was either a boy of extraordinary destiny or an extraordinary fraud, depending on which Hogwarts student one asked. The first years seem to believe you are essentially a god. The older students are more divided. The first years are wrong, Harry said. The older students are also mostly wrong in a different direction. What is the correct answer? Someone keeps trying to kill me and I keep not dying. That's the whole story. She looked at him for another moment. The fire crackled. The warm thing in his chest had shifted from anger to something that was harder to name, a kind of cautious alertness, and he was fairly sure that one was coming from her. I am Fleur, she said. Not Mademoiselle Delacour. Not the Beauxbatons girl. Fleur. Harry, he said, which was slightly absurd given that everyone in the building had just heard his full name announced by an ancient magical artifact, but she gave a small nod as though the introduction mattered regardless. Someone put your name in the goblet to put you in danger, she said. And now you and I are bound by an announcement made by that same goblet, which means whoever is operating in the shadows here has either made a catastrophic error or has introduced a variable they are very carefully not accounting for. She picked up her robes slightly and moved toward the door. Either way, I intend to win this tournament. I intend to not die. And I intend to find out who is responsible for tonight. She was already in the corridor. Same, Harry said, to her retreating back. She paused. Good. She kept walking. Sleep, when it came, was thin and restless and interrupted 3 times by flashes of something that wasn't quite dream, impressions of cold stone corridors, the smell of roses and clean air, a frustration so sharp it was almost physical. He woke at 2 in the morning with absolute certainty that Fleur was awake and pacing, and he lay in the dark of his 4-poster and stared at the canopy and thought about what she'd said. Someone had made an error or introduced a variable. He rolled that over. Yeah. That was right. But which one? Ron was asleep across the dormitory, making the specific sounds that meant he'd had an eventful evening and knocked himself out properly. Neville and Dean and Seamus were all breathing the deep slow rhythms of people who had gone to bed worried and been overtaken by simple biology. Harry was the only one still awake, which was normal for him, which he had long since stopped expecting to change. He thought about Fleur. Not about the bond, about her specifically, the way she'd stood in that room and cut through the adults' conversation to ask the direct question. Can we undo it? Not will this hurt me, is this my fault, what does this mean for my life, none of the internal spiraling he'd have done. Straight to the practical point. He respected that instinctively in a way that had nothing to do with warmth or connection or whatever the goblet thought it had detected. It was the same thing he respected about the way she'd moved through the chaos of the Great Hall, cutting through it rather than reacting to it. She competed. She competed seriously. She was here to win. So was he. The tournament was dangerous, he'd figured that out within about 5 minutes of Dumbledore explaining what it was, but danger was not a new state of affairs for Harry James Potter. The question was how to survive it, and the question beyond that was how to handle a bond he hadn't chosen with a girl he'd spoken to for roughly 8 minutes. The bond question didn't have an answer yet. The tournament question had one very simple answer, which was the same answer it always had: get better, get smarter, don't die. He fell asleep eventually with that thought still running, and in the morning the castle was waiting for him with all its complications and its staring students and its adults who had decided things about him before he woke up, and he got dressed with the same careful efficiency he'd learned in the cupboard under the stairs, fast, thorough, nothing wasted, and went down to breakfast. The Great Hall was different in the morning. Not structurally, same long tables, same enchanted ceiling, same smell of bacon and toast and the particular Hogwarts-specific combination of wood polish and old stone. But the social geography had shifted overnight. Harry walked in and felt the change the way you feel weather coming before it arrives. The looking was different. Yesterday he'd been a curiosity, today he was something more interesting and potentially more dangerous, and people's eyes tracked him from the door to the Gryffindor table with the kind of attention that had a weight to it. He sat down next to Hermione, who had clearly been awake since approximately 4 in the morning given the stack of books beside her breakfast plate. "Mate Bonds," she said, by way of greeting. "Morning, Hermione." Specifically, Vila Mate Bonds as documented in pre-1200 European magical traditions, and the Goblet of Fire's historical function as a truth-revealing instrument at bonding ceremonies. She turned a book around to show him a page dense with small text and an illustration of a goblet that looked nothing like the Triwizard one. The bond doesn't work the way most people think, it's not compulsory, it's not about being forced into anything. The traditional scholarship describes it more as a recognition. Like when you've been searching for a word and you finally find it. The connection was there already in some theoretical sense. The goblet just made it visible. Harry helped himself to toast. "So you don't think it's something that happened to us?" "I think that's the wrong question." Hermione was already flipping pages with the focused energy of someone who has found a properly interesting problem. "I think the more important question is what it means for someone to have tried to put you in the tournament. The bond is secondary. That's roughly what Fleur said last night." Hermione stopped flipping pages. She looked at him. "You spoke with her?" "Briefly." "She's smart." "She's very smart," Hermione said, with the particular tone of someone offering a compliment that has been withheld for a while. "I've been watching her in the library since they arrived. She works in a way most people here don't, she doesn't study at a subject, she works through it, like she's looking for where it comes apart." She hesitated. "Harry. About the bond. How are you actually?" He considered giving her the standard fine and discarded it. This was Hermione. Confused. Not scared of it. More confused by the timing. He looked at the toast. "I can feel her, sort of. Faint, right now. When we were in the same room it was louder." "That matches the traditional descriptions." She was writing something in the margin of the book. "It should stabilize. Apparently in the early stages before there's conscious connection between the two people it's more reactive, it spikes with strong emotions. Once you both," she chose her next words with the care of someone who was also slightly embarrassed, "establish a relationship, it becomes more background. Less intrusive. So we need to actually know each other. Essentially." Harry ate his toast and thought about this. Across the hall, the Beauxbatons contingent had arranged themselves with Fleur at one end of their table, slightly separated from the others, with a small space around her that suggested the other girls were giving her room rather than avoiding her. She was reading. She didn't look up. "There's also this," said Hermione, and pushed another book across the table. This one was open to a page with a bordered text that had the feel of something official. "Tournament rules, historical precedent. When two champions share a bond this deep, there's a provision, it's obscure, almost never invoked, but it's there. They can't be assigned as direct competitors in the same task. It doesn't mean they cooperate, they still compete for points. But the tournament structure has to account for the bond's influence. It's considered a conflict of interest to put bonded individuals in direct physical competition." Harry read the passage. Then he read it again. "Does Dumbledore know this? I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. He didn't mention it last night." Hermione's expression said several things at once, the most prominent of which was yes, and isn't that interesting. "I'd bring it up before the first task. Proactively. Don't let them make decisions about the structure without you in the room." Harry nodded. He was already thinking about who else needed to be in that conversation. He looked across the hall again. Fleur was looking at him. Directly, without the pretense of looking elsewhere, the way she'd done in the antechamber, straight on and unsentimental, a look that said I know we're doing this without assigning it any particular emotional valence. He held her gaze. She gave a small nod, barely a movement, and returned to her book. From somewhere down the Gryffindor table, he heard someone say his name in a tone he recognized, the tone that Ron used when he was working himself up to saying something he'd been sitting on all night. He turned. Ron was 3 seats down, staring at his eggs, and when he felt Harry looking he looked up with an expression that was trying to be neutral and wasn't quite getting there. "I don't think you put your name in," Ron said, and the sentence had the texture of something that had been rehearsed in the small hours of the morning. "If that wasn't clear." "It wasn't clear last night," Harry said, evenly. "Not angry. Not forgiving. Just accurate." Ron looked back at his eggs. "Yeah. Well." He forked a piece of sausage. "The bond thing's strange." "Very. Is it weird?" "Yes." "Right." Ron seemed to work through something internal. "She seems." He trailed off. "Smart," said Harry. "Focused. Not what everyone said she was." Ron nodded, slowly, in the way people nod when they're integrating information that contradicts a previous position and finding the integration uncomfortable. Down at the Hufflepuff table, Cedric Diggory caught Harry's eye and raised his coffee cup in a small, morning salute. Harry returned it. The hall continued its morning noise around them. Outside the high windows the October sky was the hard clear blue of cold weather coming in, and somewhere in the castle someone was going to tell Harry what the first task was, and before that there was potions with Snape and defense with the eye-spinning paranoid figure of Alastor Moody and history of magic with a ghost. Harry poured himself a cup of tea and drank it and thought, someone put my name in that cup. The bond was an accident or a calculated move. Either way, they've already made a mistake. The warmth in his chest flickered briefly. Fleur's end, he was already learning to distinguish, with a feeling that was almost agreement. He finished his tea. By evening, 3 specific things had happened that mattered. The first was that McGonagall had pulled him aside after Transfiguration and told him, in the particular tone she used for things she found personally objectionable but professionally necessary, that as a tournament champion he was required to attend a champion meeting the following morning with Dumbledore, the other headmasters, and Ministry Representative Ludo Bagman to discuss tournament structure and first task specifics. Harry said he'd be there. McGonagall started to add something else and stopped herself, which he'd also learned to notice. Adults stopping themselves mid-sentence around him usually meant something worth knowing had been almost said. The second was that Draco Malfoy had showed up at lunch with a badge that read Potter stinks in luminous green letters and had said several things about the bond announcement that were mostly designed to imply Harry had somehow arranged it to get attention, because apparently even ancient magic wasn't immune to being recontextualized as Harry Potter's ego. Harry had looked at him with the same flat attention he developed for situations where getting angry would be less useful than simply waiting and said nothing, which had infuriated Malfoy significantly more than a response would have. Hermione had sent a hex after Malfoy that accidentally also hit Ron, which had produced a scene in the hospital wing, and Harry had extracted himself from all of it and gone to find the library passage that Hermione's book mentioned about tournament rules. The third thing was Fleur. She found him in the corridor outside the library at 7 in the evening, which suggested she'd either been looking for him or had felt him nearby. Her hair was down now, not the formal arrangement from the day before, and she was carrying 2 books under one arm with the other hand in her robe pocket. "You found the provision," she said, when she saw what he was carrying. Hermione did. "I had the same text." She held up one of her books. "Same passage, different edition. We should go together to the meeting tomorrow." "Agreed." He held the door open. She went in without acknowledging this as a courtesy, just as a fact of spatial navigation, which he also found he appreciated more than he'd have expected. They found a table in the back of the library, away from the other students who were clustered near the front. Fleur spread her books out with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd been doing research in libraries since she could read. Harry opened his own book. For several minutes neither of them said anything and it was, not uncomfortable. More like two people who had separately arrived at a working method and found their working methods were compatible. "Do you know what the first task is?" he asked, without looking up. "No," she said. "Do you?" "No." He turned a page. "But I know how Dumbledore thinks about test design. He believes in the most direct assessment possible. Whatever we're supposed to prove, it'll be proved by something unignorable." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother was full vila," she said, and the words had the quality of something she'd decided to say rather than something that came out incidentally. "She told me, when I was young, that a mate bond was the strongest magic in the world because it wasn't about love, at first. Love comes later, maybe, if both people choose it. What the bond is actually about is recognition. Two magic systems that are fundamentally compatible. Like," she paused, searching for the word. "Like resonance," Harry said. "Two strings tuned to the same note." She looked at him. Something moved through the bond, not named, not translated, just a quality of attention. "Yes," she said. "Exactly like that." She went back to her book. "I still intend to win the tournament." "Same," said Harry. "But winning is better if we're both still alive at the end." "Obviously." They read for an hour in the quiet library, two champions from different schools and different worlds, bound by something older than either of them, working through the same problems from different angles and finding, more often than not, that they arrived at the same places. Outside, the October night pressed against the windows, cold and very dark, and somewhere in the castle something was already in motion that neither of them could see yet. But they were looking. Chapter 2, The Weight of Old Magic. The champion meeting was at 9. Harry was there at 5 past, which was deliberate. He'd learned in 4 years that being punctual to Dumbledore's gatherings meant being absorbed into the shape of the room before you'd had a chance to decide where you stood in it. Being slightly late meant you walked in while the stage was already arranged, and you could see who'd chosen which position before you had to choose yours. Fleur was already there. She was standing near the window with her hands clasped behind her back, looking out at the grounds, and from the set of her shoulders he could tell she'd made the same calculation and executed it better. She'd arrived early enough to claim the window, which was the one position in the room that let you see everyone else without being caught between them. He filed that away. Cedric was seated. Crumb was standing near the door with the air of someone who had decided that doorways were strategically superior to interior positions. Dumbledore was behind the desk, and beside him stood a broad, jovial-looking man with a colorful waistcoat and the particular brand of loud, performed cheerfulness that Harry had already learned to be suspicious of. Ludo Bagman, head of magical games and sports, the kind of man who'd have called you old boy 30 seconds after meeting you and genuinely believed it conveyed warmth. Karkaroff was in the corner. Madame Maxime was standing because sitting would have required a chair that didn't exist in this room. Snape was there. Harry had not expected Snape, and he noted the fact of him the way he noted most unexpected things, quickly, internally, filed for later. "Harry, good morning," said Dumbledore. "Please come in." Harry came in. He stood between the window and the desk, which put him equidistant from Fleur and the door, and he watched Fleur register this in her peripheral vision without moving. "Right then," said Bagman, clapping his hands together like a man at a sporting event rather than a meeting about magical binding obligations. "Lovely morning, isn't it? Now, there are some administrative matters to sort through regarding our rather unprecedented situation, but I thought we'd start with the exciting part, Mr. Bagman," said Fleur. Bagman blinked. "Yes, Miss Delacour," she said, and waited a beat for him to write it somewhere in his mind. "Before the tournament structure is discussed, Harry and I would like to raise a provision from the historical record. It's relevant to how the tasks are arranged." The room shifted. It was a subtle thing, the quality of adult attention reconfiguring when two teenagers revealed they'd done homework the adults didn't know about. Harry took the book from under his arm and opened it to the marked page. Article 9 of the Traditional Tournament Provisions, adopted 1294, he said. Bonded champions may not be placed in direct physical competition within a single task. The bond is classified as a conflict of interest, not because it prevents competitive effort, but because the bond's properties mean that harm inflicted on one champion by another may propagate through the connection, creating involuntary disadvantage. He put the book on the desk and looked at Dumbledore. We'd like that provision honored. Dumbledore looked at the page. He looked at it for what felt like longer than necessary for a man who had presumably read every tournament document ever written. He is correct, said Madame Maxime, who had apparently been waiting for this moment. The provision exists. I am surprised it was not raised last night. It slipped my mind, said Dumbledore, and the mildness of his tone was so complete that Harry couldn't tell whether it was genuine or architectural. But yes. Of course. We'll structure the tasks accordingly. He looked at Harry and then at Fleur with an expression that was almost, something. Approval, maybe, or the particular satisfaction of a chess player watching a piece move exactly as theorized. Well done, both of you. Thank you, said Fleur, with the tone of someone accepting a compliment and not a favor. Can we move on, said Karkaroff, who looked like he'd bitten something sour. The first task. Bagman recovered his momentum with the ease of a natural entertainer and moved into the room's center as though he owned it. Right. Yes. The first task. Champions will face it in 3 weeks, the 24th of November. The aim, simply put, is to retrieve an object from a guarded location. The nature of the guard, and the specific object, will not be disclosed in advance. He beamed around the room. It's designed to test courage, magical ability, and resourcefulness under pressure. What is the guard, said Crumb. It was the first thing Crumb had said. His voice was deeper than Harry had expected, accented and direct. That's rather the point that it, animals. People. Constructed enchantment. Crumb pressed, not rudely, just with the factual persistence of someone who evaluated problems by category. Bagman opened his mouth and Dumbledore said, gently, the guards are living creatures. That's all the advance information I'm prepared to offer. Living creatures. Harry turned that over. He looked at Fleur. She was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone running through lists internally. He felt, through the bond, the particular quality of focused problem-solving. It felt like the hum of a well-tuned engine, if an engine could have an emotional temperature. The meeting ran another 30 minutes, covering scoring procedures, the Yule Ball, inter-school restrictions on collaborative preparation. Harry noted that the Yule Ball was mandatory for all champions, that champions would open the dance, that this was treated as equally important to surviving a dangerous magical creature by everyone in the room except Cedric, who also seemed mildly baffled by the priority. When they were dismissed, Harry fell into step alongside Fleur in the corridor naturally, without discussing it. Cedric caught up on Harry's other side. Living creatures, said Cedric. Yes, said Harry. Could be anything from a hippogriff to something properly dangerous. I'm planning for properly dangerous, said Harry. Same, said Fleur. She glanced at Cedric with the direct assessment she seemed to use on everyone. You're better than your reputation suggests. Most champions of your type rely on the crowd. Cedric looked slightly startled. My type. Likeable. Easy in rooms. Good with people. She said it without judgment. Such champions usually trust their social skill to carry them when skill with magic fails. You don't seem to be planning to do that. No, said Cedric, and he was smiling a little now. I'm really not. He looked at Harry. She's right about the categorization, I'm not offended. The question is what category you fall into. The one where someone's always trying to kill me, Harry said, so I've had to get good at not dying. Cedric laughed, a genuine one. Right. Yeah. Fair enough. They parted ways at the staircase. As Cedric headed up toward the Hufflepuff common rooms, Harry became aware that someone was following them. The awareness arrived through an instinct he developed in third year when Sirius had been stalking the castle, a prickling at the back of the neck, a change in the sound of footsteps. He and Fleur turned simultaneously. Moody was 10 feet behind them. Or rather, Moody had been 10 feet behind them, and had stopped when they turned, and was now standing in the corridor with his magical eye spinning and his mouth doing the thing that passed for a smile on his face. "Potter," he said. "Word. Both of us, or just me?" Harry said. Moody's gaze moved to Fleur for a moment. The magical eye looked somewhere else entirely, through the wall, probably, checking the corridor on the other side. "Both of you's fine," he said. "Come to my office." Moody's office smelled like something preserved in alcohol and old smoke, and every surface held either a dark arts detection instrument or something that looked like it had been confiscated from a very ambitious dark wizard. The sneakoscope on the desk was spinning in idle, steady circles. Harry sat down in one of the chairs in front of the desk. Fleur examined the nearest instrument on the shelf, a glass globe showing a slow storm inside, and then sat beside him. Moody didn't sit. He stood with one hand on his desk and looked at them both with both eyes, the real one and the spinning one, giving the impression of being looked at from two different angles simultaneously. "You handled the meeting well," he said. "The provision. That was smart. Hermione Granger found it," Harry said. "I carried the book." "Don't undersell the carrying," said Moody. "Half of intelligence is knowing which books to carry." He lowered himself into his chair with the creak of a man whose skeleton has objections. "I'm going to tell you something I shouldn't, officially. I'm going to tell you because you're both going into this tournament blind and because someone arranged for that, and because I don't like those odds." The sneakoscope was still spinning. Harry watched it. "Whoever put your name in that cup, Potter, they're still in this castle. They're watching the tournament from the inside. The goblet's declaration last night was not part of their plan. I could see it, the wrongness of it, the way the room reorganized around something that hadn't been accounted for." He looked at Fleur. "Your bond is not a vulnerability. Don't let anyone convince you it is. I've been in situations where the difference between dead and alive came down to one person who knew where you were without looking. What you have is not a handicap." Fleur was listening with perfect stillness. "Do you know who put his name in?" "Not yet. But I will." Something moved across his scarred face, not quite a smile, something grimmer. "Someone with access to the goblet, knowledge of Confundus charms powerful enough to fool an age-old enchantment, and a reason to want Potter in a dangerous situation." He looked at Harry. "Start making that list." "It's already started," Harry said. Moody nodded once. "The first task. Living creature, I can't tell you what specifically. But I can tell you this, the best way to succeed is not to defeat the guard. It's to neutralize its investment in guarding you. Every living creature's behavior is goal-directed. Figure out the goal and you figure out the way around." He stood up, which served as the meeting's ending. "Get out, the both of you. And stay sharp." They went out. In the corridor, walking back toward the main castle, Fleur said, "He knew more than he said." "He always does," said Harry. "But what he said was useful." "Yes." She was thinking, that engine hum feeling running through the bond again. Neutralize the guard's investment in the goal, not the guard itself. She paused. "It's a large creature. Whatever it is, the intelligence required to think around it rather than through it means it has a protective purpose, not a combative one." Harry stopped walking. "Like a mother." She stopped too and looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, a quick, sharp attention. Something that guards something valuable. Not because it's trained to. Because it has a reason. She started walking again, faster. "We need to get to the library." They spent the next 4 days in an unofficial partnership that neither of them formally named. Fleur went to her lessons and Harry went to his, and in the evenings they found themselves at the same library table with an increasing stack of shared books between them, working through magical creatures with protective behaviors. Hermione joined them on the second evening, took one look at the organized chaos of their research, and immediately began constructing a more efficient categorization system while expressing opinions about bibliographic methodology that both Harry and Fleur absorbed without comment. The bond was changing. Not dramatically, it hadn't become anything he'd call intrusive, but it was more present than it had been the first night. He was aware of Fleur the way he was aware of the weather, not always consciously, but there as background information. During classes he'd sometimes catch a flash of frustration that wasn't his, or a thread of wry amusement from somewhere 3 floors away, and he'd know she was in a lesson she found either too easy or too slow. She told him later, with complete matter-of-factness, that she could feel when he was in defense against the dark arts because the quality of his focus sharpened to something that was distinctly different from his other lessons. Like a different muscle engaging, she said. You can tell that specifically. The bond apparently conveys texture. Moody's lessons feel different from Binz's lessons. It isn't thoughts, more the emotional coloring of thought. They were in the library. Hermione, across the table, had looked up from her book with the particular expression she got when something was academically fascinating and personally relevant. That's consistent with the intermediate bond stage, she said. Pre-verbal communication through emotional resonance. It gets more specific over time. In the older texts, long-bonded pairs describe something almost like, Hermione, said Harry. Yes. One thing at a time. She returned to her book, looking slightly put upon. Fleur glanced at him with something that was the facial precursor to amusement, that half-second before a smile. He'd started to recognize the sequence. She loves you very much, Fleur said, quietly. She worries about me, he said. She thinks worry is love because usually it functions the same way. Fleur looked at him, not the assessment look, something slightly different. He'd started cataloging her looks the way you catalog the different notes an instrument can make. That's perceptive, she said. I've had time to think about it. Where is your family? You never mention them. They're not, he stopped. This wasn't a conversation he had. Usually. The word family in Harry's interior vocabulary was stacked so high with complicated meaning that any direct question about it felt like someone poking the wrong part of a machine and waiting for the noise. It's complicated. She didn't push. She went back to her book, and through the bond he felt something that wasn't quite sympathy, more like the recognition of a shape, the way you recognize a bruise by the way someone guards around it. My mother died when I was 5, she said, to her book. My father raised us, me and Gabrielle. He is a person who loves people by worrying about them too. A brief pause. I understand the vocabulary. Harry didn't say anything for a moment. Then, what's Gabrielle like? The bond lit up warm. Completely different quality from anything he'd felt from Fleur so far, unguarded, immediate, the specific warmth of someone whose love for a person is so settled and complete it doesn't require maintenance. Impossible, she said. She believes everything I do is correct. This is wonderful and also regularly dangerous, because she will follow me into things. Harry smiled at his book. Sounds like Ron, except Ron's less convinced I'm always right. Is that why you still consider him a friend? After last night? The smile softened but didn't disappear. Yeah. Roughly. Draco Malfoy became a consistent problem around day 3. It started as social noise, the badges, the comments in corridors, the campaign of low-grade hostility that Harry had long since learned to filter like background radiation. But Malfoy was also, Harry noticed, watching both of them in a particular way, and the watching had a specific quality that was separate from his usual performative contempt. He was taking notes, almost. Cataloging things. He'd watch Harry and Fleur walk to the library together and his expression would go briefly unguarded in a way that, on a more honest face, would have looked afraid. Afraid was interesting. Malfoy afraid of something meant Malfoy reporting to something. Harry filed this alongside the other things he was filing and didn't confront it yet, because the useful thing about someone who was watching you was that they could be watched back. He's a child playing at a game he doesn't fully understand, Fleur said, when Harry mentioned it. They were in the corridor heading to the Great Hall, and Malfoy had just done the badge thing while passing them, accompanied by two large friends. Fleur hadn't broken stride. "He's got a father on the board of governors and a family connection to things I'd rather not have connections to," Harry said. "I know who the Malfoys are." The certainty in her voice said she'd done her background reading before coming. "I also know they follow power. His behavior is either personal, in which case it's irrelevant, or directed, in which case the direction is what matters." She glanced back over her shoulder as Malfoy's group rounded the far corner. "What does it feel like when Dumbledore watches you?" The shift in subject didn't feel like a shift, it felt like the same sentence turning a corner. Harry thought about it. "Like being measured for something. He's not hostile. But there's always something else going on." "Yes," she said. "And Snape?" "Snape is separate. Snape has his own history with me. Last night in Dumbledore's office, Snape was there and he said nothing. Not one word in 40 minutes. She held the Great Hall door open. He'd started paying attention to the fact that she never waited for someone to hold a door, she just held whichever side she arrived at first. A man who says nothing in a room full of argument is either bored or watching something specific. Snape doesn't get bored. No, she agreed. He doesn't. They found their respective tables. The meal was loud and normal and Harry ate with Hermione and a subdued Ron who was trying, Harry could tell, to recalibrate his feelings about the whole situation and finding the recalibration uncomfortable. He left Ron to it. Pushing Ron toward a conclusion always produced the wrong conclusion, giving him space generally produced the right one, eventually. Neville sat down across from Harry and said, "I looked up old tournament records. For the first task. In one of them from 1792 there was something." He opened a small notebook, handwriting small and careful. "The champion who survived the most dangerous guard that year didn't attack it. He spent 20 minutes in the arena doing nothing but standing still. The creature eventually moved away on its own. He retrieved the object and walked out." Harry looked at Neville. "That's brilliant. Where'd you find that?" Neville went slightly pink. "The library has better categorized records than people think. Hermione showed me the organization system." He closed the notebook. "The guard doesn't want to hurt you. It's defending something. If you stop being a threat, it might stop treating you like one." Harry thought about what Moody had said. Neutralize the investment, not the creature. He thought about what Fleur had said. Large. Protective. Not trained to guard but guarding by nature. "Neville," he said, "you've just told me something very useful." Neville nodded, pleased and slightly embarrassed about being pleased. "I thought you should know. You know. Given everything." He looked down at his notebook. "If something's guarding something it loves, even something very dangerous, you just have to prove you're not there for that thing. That you're there for something else." Harry stored this with the precision of someone who'd learned to sort useful information from noise. He looked up and found Fleur watching him from across the hall with a slight tilt of her head. She'd felt something through the bond, some flash of the click that happens when a piece of a puzzle lands correctly. He gave her a small nod. She returned it. 3 days before the task, the bond did something new. He was in the middle of the night, awake as usual, when it happened, not a flash or a flicker but a sustained, clear emotional transmission that was as coherent as a sentence, if a sentence could be made of feeling rather than words. It was, frustrated, circling a problem, near solution but not there yet. He lay still and let it be for a moment, then thought very deliberately about the research strand he and Fleur had been working, the one about the creature's instinctive responses to different kinds of magical signatures. They'd been trying to figure out whether a calm magical presence would read differently to the creature than an aggressive one. There was a pause. Then through the bond came something that was almost exactly, "Yes, that's the one." He sat up. She was awake, working through the same problem. And they were communicating, sort of, across several floors of stone castle and 20 different students asleep around them, using a medium that was nothing like language but was carrying information with the clarity of language. He picked up the notebook from his bedside table and wrote, magical signature. Calm state, non-threatening. What changes in a person's magical field when they're not afraid? In the morning, when they met at the library table, Fleur had a book open to a passage about baseline magical auras and had annotated the margins in small, precise French script. She pushed it across without preamble. He read it and pushed across his own notebook with the night's thoughts. She read them and her expression did the thing, the precursor to a smile, the muscular arrangement. A clemency, she said. I don't know it. Not fully. But the principle, a calm, sealed mind reads differently to things sensitive to magic. There's a technique. Less about shields, more about baseline. She tapped the book. The creature will respond to the totality of your magical presence. If you come in broadcasting threat, it will respond to threat. If you come in broadcasting, nothing, Harry said. If I come in broadcasting nothing, it doesn't know what to do with me. Presence without intention, she said. Exactly. Can you teach me? She looked at him for a moment. I can show you what it feels like. The bond is actually useful here, you can feel the difference in me when I do it. She straightened in her chair. Watch. She did something. He didn't see it happen, there was no visible movement, no wand, nothing physical. But through the bond, which had been carrying that steady engine hum of her focused mind, something shifted. The hum didn't disappear, it became quieter. Not absent, not suppressed. More like a sound turning from a vibration into a held note, present, stable, without urgency. The aggressive quality of focused thought, the quality that had edges, became smooth. It was, genuinely, like watching someone take a very clean breath. That, she said, is what you're aiming for. He tried. It took several attempts, each one visible to him through the bond's other end, Fleur sitting still and telling him with tiny shifts in her expression when he was closer or further. The bond made it function almost like a biofeedback system, two people using their connection as an instrument rather than being used by it. On the fourth attempt, he felt something in himself go smooth in a way he hadn't known was possible, a stillness that wasn't emptiness but was very much unlike any state he'd been in before. Fleur's expression changed fully. Not the precursor this time, the actual smile, small and precise and real. There, she said. That's it. The warmth in the bond was unmistakable. 2 days before the first task, Hagrid found Harry. He was in the corridor outside herbology, and Hagrid's approach was unmissable on account of being Hagrid. He looked excited and guilty in equal measure, which was a combination Harry had learned meant Hagrid was about to do something that would be framed as a favor but was technically a secret. Harry, he said, come and see me tonight. Bring your friend. He gestured vaguely and searched for a word. Fleur, said Harry. Yeah, Hagrid nodded vigorously. Both of yeah. After midnight if yeah can manage it. What is it? Just come see. He was already lumbering away, and Harry had the specific suspicion of someone who had been down this road before. Last time Hagrid had said just come see it had been baby dragons in an illegal situation. He relayed this to Fleur at the library table that evening and she'd absorbed it with a look that said she was filing Hagrid, well-intentioned, unpredictable, source of critical information for future reference. At midnight they were under Harry's invisibility cloak, which was tight for 2 people but workable, crossing the dark grounds toward Hagrid's hut with the October frost crunching under their feet. Fleur's shoulder was against his. She moved with him at the same pace without needing to adjust, which he'd have attributed to the bond but suspected was also just athletic competence. Hagrid was outside waiting. And beyond him, chained in a row, breathing smoke and fire against the black sky, were 4 dragons. Harry stopped. Fleur made a sound. Not fear, more the sharp intake of someone recalibrating an estimate significantly upward. "Dragons," she said. "Yep," said Hagrid, looking somewhere between proud and guilty. "Hungarian horntails, a Chinese fireball, a Swedish shortsnout, and a Welsh green. Beautiful, aren't they?" Harry looked at the horntail, which was looking back at him with yellow eyes that contained a specific kind of intelligence, not human intelligence, but the deep purposeful intelligence of something that had been alive much longer than he had and understood very precisely what it was and what it wasn't. Beside each dragon, secured under heavy charm work, were clusters of eggs. "They're guarding their eggs," Harry said. "That's it," said Hagrid. "Does the task. Go past the dragon, retrieve the golden egg, there's one in each nest, look, in among the real eggs, and off ye go. Simple enough. Simple as death." Harry looked at the horntail again and thought about magical signatures and calm states and the presence without intention that Fleur had shown him, and felt the whole shape of the problem click into a completely different arrangement. "Thank you, Hagrid," he said. Hagrid waved it off. "Look after yourselves, the both of ye. Dragons is serious. Even the short snout." Fleur was still looking at the row of chained creatures. Her expression was deeply focused, the engine hum coming through steady and warm. "The Welsh green is the least aggressive of the four," she said, to Harry rather than Hagrid. "Smaller eggs, less intense protective instinct. I'll take the green." Harry looked at the horntail. It was still looking at him. There was something in the locked gaze that felt weirdly familiar, not friendly, not hostile, just the direct unmovable attention of something that would respond to truth and couldn't be fooled by anything else. "I'll take the horntail," he said. Hagrid made a noise of protest. "Harry, the horntail's the most." "I know," Harry said. "It's fine." He felt Fleur look at him sideways. He felt, through the bond, not worry exactly, more the quality of someone regrounding an estimate, rerunning numbers, concluding that the numbers might actually hold. They walked back to the castle in the cold and the quiet, the cloak pulled over both of them, and at some point during the walk their hands had ended up in the same general space and it wasn't quite holding on, more like two people in the same small shelter being pragmatically aware of where the other person was. The warmth between them had nothing to do with the October cold. "Why the horntail?" she said, quietly. "It's the most direct problem," he said. "If I can work the technique on the horntail, it works on anything. If I test it on an easier dragon and it fails with the horntail, I've learned the wrong lesson." "You're not afraid of anything, are you?" She didn't say it admiringly, more the way you say something when a fact has become undeniable. "I'm afraid of plenty," he said. "I just don't let it be in charge." A pause. The castle was close now, its lights warm against the dark. "My grandmother said something else," Fleur said. "About the bond. She said the reason it works, the reason it's recognized as real magic rather than mere Vila attraction, is because it happens between two people who are fundamentally the same kind of person, underneath whatever they look like or where they come from." She paused again. "She said because when you're in real danger together, you don't waste time being afraid of each other." Harry thought about that for a moment. "Is that what this is?" he said. "Real danger? Someone is trying to kill you. The magic of a binding older than this school has attached itself to both of us without our consent. There are 4 dragons in a field." She pushed the castle door open. "Yes. I'd say this qualifies." He almost laughed. She went inside and the warmth she left behind through the bond, the steady settled quality of it, was already becoming something he'd noticed the absence of, in the brief moments when she was far enough away. He went inside. The door closed behind him. The castle was quiet and dark and full of people sleeping through things they didn't know were happening, and somewhere in it someone was planning things that neither he nor Fleur could fully see yet, and there were 2 days until dragons. He realized, not afraid. He was ready. The morning before the task, he found Fleur at breakfast already writing what he recognized as practice notes for the Comstate technique. She looked up when he sat down, not at her table, she'd come to his, which had produced approximately 12 seconds of Gryffindor silence before the table decided to be normal again about it. "Did you sleep?" he said. "A little." She pushed the notes across. "You?" "About that much." He looked at the notes. They were precise and detailed and completely consistent with everything they'd worked out together. "We're as ready as we can be." She looked at him with that direct, unsentimental regard. "We are. How are you feeling?" The question was real, not procedural, and she understood the difference. She thought about it, actually thought, visibly, which was something he'd noticed she did rather than producing a reflexive answer. "Like a person who has been handed a very large problem and has worked every angle they can work," she said. "Which is the best I can feel about it." "Yeah," he said. "Same." Hermione appeared at the end of the table, looked at the two of them and the shared notes between them, looked at the rest of the Gryffindor table pretending not to watch, and sat down with the air of someone who had decided to be entirely normal about everything. "I found one more thing last night," she said, pulling a paper from her bag. "About the Horntail specifically, Hermione," said Harry and Fleur, simultaneously. She stopped. "Eat your breakfast," Harry said. Hermione looked between them, looked at the paper, put the paper away, and picked up a piece of toast. "Fine," she said. "But you should know it was useful." The warmth in Harry's chest had a quality that was distinct from anything previous, lighter, more open, like a window cracked in a room that had been sealed. He thought it might be something like confidence, but it was doubled, the way you sometimes catch two instruments playing the same note and the combined sound is richer than either alone. He ate his breakfast. Tomorrow there would be dragons. He couldn't wait. Chapter 3, Fire and Scale. The champion's tent smelled like canvas and cold air and the specific nervous energy of 4 people who had spent weeks preparing for something and were now 20 minutes from finding out whether the preparation was enough. Harry had been in the tent for 10 minutes and he'd already catalogued everything useful about it: one entrance facing the arena, one emergency exit flap at the back, a wooden table with water and towels that nobody was touching, for chairs that nobody was sitting in. Cedric was standing near the entrance with his wand turning slowly in his fingers, not spinning, just moving, the unconscious manual habit of someone whose thinking ran through their hands. Crumb was seated, which was somehow more tense than standing. He had his arms on his knees and his eyes forward, and he looked like a man who had identified the exact nature of the problem and was prepared to be straightforward about it. Fleur was beside Harry. Not pressed against him, not close enough to read as anything other than 2 people who had arrived at adjacent positions. But through the bond she was radiantly present in a way that was completely different from the background warmth of distance, sharper, more detailed, the emotional equivalent of a voice becoming a face. He could feel the particular quality of her readiness, the way it had texture, not calm exactly, something that lived just above calm, like a drawn bow. Controlled energy. Everything pointed in one direction. He felt her notice him noticing. She didn't look at him but something in her posture shifted fractionally, and through the bond came a wry thread of amusement that felt, translated into human vocabulary, roughly like, "Yes, I know, we're both doing it." Outside, the crowd was already audible, a low roar that built in waves, punctuated by the particular sound of a very large creature being unhappy about something. The dragons were in the arena. He could feel the heat from here, or thought he could, although possibly that was anticipation rather than temperature. Bagman stuck his head in. He was in full matchday mode, rosy-cheeked, loud, wearing his old Vimborn wasp's robes in what Harry suspected was a nostalgic indulgence. "Right then, champions. The order's been decided. Cedric, you're first. Then Crumb, then Harry, then, Fleur." He beamed around the tent as though he'd just announced a pleasant afternoon's entertainment. "Each of you will enter the arena alone. The crowd will be kept well back. The aim is to retrieve the golden egg from the dragon's nest. Accio is allowed, direct combat spells are allowed, any magic is permitted as long as it doesn't harm the crowd." He paused. "The dragon is, in the arena." Not chained. Not chained. Harry noted this. The horntails had a week to settle into her nest, said Bagman. She'll be very protective. Very focused. He said this with the cheerfulness of someone who was not going into the arena himself. Right. Cedric, you're up in about 5 minutes, Mr. Bagman, said Fleur. Yes, miss, yes. What is the scoring? Up to 50 points per judge. 5 judges, there's myself, Dumbledore, Madame Maxime, Karkaroff, and someone from the ministry. Style, speed, and degree of difficulty. Bagman's expression suggested that he found this summary both accurate and slightly boring compared to the spectacle portion. Fleur nodded once and returned her gaze to the middle distance. Bagman withdrew. The tent closed. Cedric rolled his neck and said, quietly, to nobody in particular, 5 years of defense and transfiguration in care of magical creatures and it still comes down to a pen and a dragon. What are you going to do? Harry asked. Cedric looked at him, seemed to decide that sharing information between potential competitors was a choice he was making deliberately. Transfigure something to distract it. A stone into a dog, probably. Get the dragon looking somewhere else. He paused. You. Go in calm, Harry said. Don't threaten it. Get it to move. Cedric processed this. He stopped. Processed further. Actually that might work better than mine. He didn't say it competitively, more admiringly. Yours doesn't escalate the situation. Mine introduces a new animal into an already defensive creature's space. A stone dog might read as threat, Crumb said. He was still sitting but he'd engaged, which changed the room slightly. Something the dragon didn't put there, moving in its territory. He looked at Harry. Your approach is theoretically sound. The difficulty is execution. Calm in theory is not the same as calm with a horntail. His accent was heavy but his English precise, each word chosen. I am using mist. Reduce visibility, then reach with extended summoning. I am going to sing, said Fleur. 3 pairs of eyes turned to her. She met them without embarrassment. Vila Heritage. The partial expression is not the compulsive attraction you've seen, that's a stress response. When I'm in control, the harmonics in my magic take on a particular quality. She said it factually, the way she said everything. The Welsh Green has never encountered Vila magic. A completely novel stimulus in a stressful environment creates a moment of attentional reset, a reset I intend to use. Does it hurt it? Asked Cedric. No more than a new sound hurts anything. It's disorienting, not harmful. She paused a beat. I care that the dragon is unharmed. They're extraordinary creatures. She said this with the same matter-of-factness, and Harry felt it corroborated through the bond, a genuine thing, not performance. Cedric looked at Harry with an expression that was doing something between admiration and amusement. Did we all, Cedric said, slowly, end up at the same place? Don't fight the dragon. Don't threaten the dragon. Give it something else to be doing. A beat of silence. Yes, said Crumb. The tent horn sounded for Cedric's entry. He straightened, rolled his wand once more in his fingers, and walked to the entrance. He paused at the flap and looked back at them, not for reassurance, just a look, the kind that acknowledges shared circumstance without turning it into a speech. Good luck, he said. He went out. The arena was not visible from inside the tent but it was absolutely audible, which in some ways was worse. The crowd sound gave information without context. There were waves of reaction, gasps, a collective held breath, a roar of approval, and Harry listened and tried to construct a picture from the sound data. Cedric was alive, he could tell that much, because dead silence would follow a death and this wasn't silence, this was active noise. There was a thunder of something heavy, the dragon, moving, reorienting. Then a series of sounds he couldn't identify. Then a long sustained noise from the crowd that peaked and held, and then the horn sounded. Cedric came back in looking scorched at one sleeve and breathing hard, with the golden egg tucked under his arm. He sat down immediately, put the egg between his feet, and pressed his unscorched hand to his forehead. "Dog worked," he said. "Dragon went for the dog. I ran for the egg." He paused. The transfiguration broke after about 40 seconds when she figured it out. Another pause. "She's fast." He had a score posted outside, they could see it through the tent flap when someone briefly opened it, 32 points. Good. Not exceptional. Then Crumb. Crumb went out without ceremony, without a last word to the tent, just stood up and walked. The crowd outside reacted to his appearance with a particular sustained noise that suggested he was known and appreciated, which tracked. The sounds from the arena during Crumb's run were different. There was a long quiet stretch that Harry identified as the mist phase, then abrupt movement, and then a sound he hadn't heard during Cedric's turn, a deep bellow, not of aggression, more of confusion. Then horn. Crumb came back. He was completely unscorched, unruffled, but moving with a slight controlled tension in his jaw that said the operation had worked, and the controlled tension was what happened when you did something risky smoothly and hadn't fully unwound from it yet. He looked at his score, 38, and sat back down with the expression of a man who found 38 acceptable but had expected 40. Then Harry. The horn for his entry sounded and he felt the bond pulse briefly. Fleur, a single clean transmission that didn't translate into words but had the quality of, "I'm here, I'll know if something goes wrong, go." He walked out. The noise hit him first. 500 people at minimum, the stands packed with students and the staff table visible at the far end with Dumbledore's silver beard catching the afternoon light and the judges' area below the stands with its little raised platform. Then he saw the arena. It was larger than it looked from outside, rough stone walls rising 15 feet, the floor packed earth that had been churned and scorched in recent memory. The golden egg was visible from the entrance, a gleaming sphere nestled in among a cluster of larger eggs near the far wall, roughly 100 feet from where he stood. The horntail was between him and it. She was not what he'd expected, which was itself useful information. Whatever he'd expected, she exceeded it. 6 meters long from tail spike to snout, with skin like hammered black iron and wings folded against her back in a way that suggested they could open to twice her body length without effort. She had been watching the entrance since before he came through it, which meant she had heard or sensed him coming, which meant her awareness extended beyond the visible. Her eyes were gold. Not yellow, as he'd thought at night in the field. In daylight they were genuinely gold, with pupils that were contracted vertical slits in the November afternoon light. They tracked him with an absolute attention that was not anger. It was something older and more specific than anger. This was a creature who had identified a potential threat to something irreplaceable and was determining exactly what kind of threat it was. Harry stopped. He stood still, 40 feet from the dragon, and did not reach for his wand. The crowd went quiet with the confused quality of an audience watching someone do the wrong thing very calmly. He breathed out. He found the technique, not by thinking about it, which would have defeated the purpose, but by letting it happen the way Fleur had shown him, the way he'd practiced until it was less like an action and more like a natural state. The edges came off his magical field. The urgency, the defensive posture, the fight-or-flight charge that had been running under everything since he walked into the arena, he didn't suppress it. He let it be there and let it be quiet, the way a river doesn't stop flowing when it slows but moves differently. Presence without intention. The horntail's head moved. A small thing, maybe 8 inches to the right, then back. Like something recalibrating. He took one step forward. Slow. The way you move toward a wild animal that is not yet committed to a response. She watched him. Another step. His heart was doing things that were entirely inconsistent with the calm he was projecting, but the heart and the magical field were apparently addressable separately, and the field was what the dragon was reading. He kept going. 1 step. 2. The golden eggs of the nest were at the edges of his vision, enormous and smooth, and the horntail's tail was moving slowly, a kind of pendulum motion that he recognized from Hagrid's descriptions as not aggression but the idle movement of controlled waiting. She's not going to attack yet, he thought. She's waiting to see what I want. He was 30 feet from the nest now. The air tasted of sulfur and something metallic. The dragon's breath was hot from here, a dry wave of heat coming from those gold eyes and that half-open mouth. He stopped again. He looked at the dragon directly, not the defiant stare of challenge, just a direct look, the same look he'd give a person he was trying to be honest with. He'd thought about this part. Hagrid had said once that magical creatures could read intent more accurately than most wizards. Moody had said, neutralize the investment in the goal. Neville had said, prove you're not there for the thing she loves. Harry pointed his wand, slowly, at the golden egg. Not at the dragon. At the egg. He held it there for a moment, letting her see it. Then he shifted it to himself. Pointed it at his own chest. I'm not here for your eggs. I'm here for the other one. The horntail's head dropped 3 inches. Just 3 inches. Her wingspan didn't open. Her tail stopped moving. He stepped to the side, very deliberately, away from the cluster of real eggs, moving in an arc toward the golden one. She tracked him with her eyes. Her head turned. But she didn't move her body, didn't orient her fire toward him, didn't shift into the full defensive posture he'd seen her in during Hagrid's visit. She watched him with those gold eyes and let him move. At 20 feet from the golden egg, she made a sound. Not a roar, something lower, a rumble that he felt in his sternum. A warning. Close enough. He stopped. Okay. Fair enough. He raised his wand properly now, not at the dragon but at the egg, and said, clearly and deliberately, Accio. The golden egg tore free of the nest and sailed through the air toward him. He caught it with both hands, the warmth of it immediately tangible through his palms, and in the same moment the horntail's head snapped toward where the egg had been, a reflex, involuntary, her attention pulled to the nest. He was already moving sideways, backing away, not running. Running would have triggered something different in the predator pattern, but walking backward with the same measured pace. She realized within seconds that it was the golden egg and not one of hers. She looked at it in his hands and looked at her nest, and did something with her head that Harry could only describe as a controlled assessment of a situation concluded. She let him go. The crowd erupted. He was at the entrance and through it before the sound fully reached him, and then he was inside the tent and the tent was very loud for a moment because Cedric was standing and shouting something and even Crumb had unfolded from his chair and was on his feet with an expression of complete surprise that he hadn't quite managed to suppress. Harry set the golden egg down on the table and sat down and realized his legs had been shaking for the past 30 feet and he hadn't noticed until they stopped. How did you? Cedric started. Don't fight the dragon, Harry said. He was breathing harder than he'd registered. Don't threaten the dragon. Cedric made a sound that was half laugh, half something with more respect in it. You walked up to a horntail. It worked. It absolutely worked. Cedric shook his head. 40 seconds start to finish. My dog ran for 12 seconds before, the horn sounded for Fleur. The tent went quiet. It was a different quiet from Cedric's entry quiet, from Crumb's. Both Harry and Cedric had turned toward the exit flap without deciding to, and Harry was aware of the bond, very aware of it, the quality of Fleur's readiness just before she walked out sharp and present and then fading, getting quieter, as if she was doing the technique herself, pulling her magical field inward. She was calming herself the same way. Before going into the arena. The same technique. Outside, the crowd made a different noise for Fleur's entry than it had made for the others. There was an appreciative quality to it that had nothing to do with her magical ability, and Harry recognized that particular noise and found he didn't like the sound of it on her behalf. The crowd quieted fairly quickly though, which meant something interesting was happening. He couldn't hear what she was doing. No massive dragon sounds, no crowd gasps, just a strange sustained quiet that stretched longer than he liked and then was broken by something that wasn't quite music, more like music's intention without music's structure. The harmonic she described. He could feel it faintly, very faintly, through the bond, not the sound itself but its quality, clear, absolutely controlled, something designed to occupy the entirety of a listening creature's attention. The Welsh Green's response was audible even from the tent, a long, confused bellow that was completely different from the horntail's warning rumble, more disoriented, and then the crowd made a sharp collective noise and then the horn sounded. Fleur came back in. She was entirely unscorched. Her hair was down from whatever arrangement it had been in when she entered, the wind of the arena probably, or possibly a near miss she'd chosen not to mention. She was carrying the golden egg and she set it next to Harry's without ceremony and stood there for a moment with her hands at her sides, breathing with the controlled precision of someone who has been doing something that required a lot of herself. She looked at Harry first. Not the tent, not the other champions, him, specifically. He felt through the bond what he'd felt during his own exit, the residual shaking, the adrenaline settling, the particular quality of I did it, it worked. But underneath all of that, something warmer. The harmonic worked, he said. Completely, she said. She stood still for the full 10 seconds. I walked past her. She looked at her hands for a moment. I've never used that level of control in an actual contest. I wasn't certain it would hold. It held, he said. She looked up at him. Yes. Cedric was looking at his score, which had been posted, 41, which made his face do something pleased and surprised simultaneously. Crumb had gotten 40. The scoreboard updated with Harry's score, 47, which produced a noise from the direction of the judge's stand that he could hear even from here, a ripple of something that wasn't entirely approval. Karkaroff's contribution to the score would be conspicuously low, he knew. Fleur's score came in, 44. Your harmony will have cost you a point somewhere, Harry said. Someone didn't know what they were hearing. Karkaroff, she said, immediately. He evaluated it as non-magical assistance. The Vila classification issue. She didn't seem particularly upset by this, more categorizing it for later. 44 is sufficient. More than sufficient, said Cedric. Crumb nodded. He was looking at Fleur with the expression of someone adding her to an internal list of people to take seriously, which she was clearly already on but which had just been moved to a different position. The harmonic technique, he said. Is that trainable or native? Both, she said, sitting down now. The capacity is native. The control is entirely trained. She looked at her egg. What is in yours, do you think? It screams, said Cedric, with feeling. I opened mine when I went back to my room and it screamed. Continuously. Until I closed it. A clue about the second task, said Crumb. A clue that sounds like something dying, said Cedric. Helpful. Harry looked at his egg. He'd open it later. Right now the adrenaline was still present, running off slowly, and he was aware of something else. The fact that he'd walked up to a Hungarian horntail and come back. Not just come back, gotten 47 points and barely been threatened. The technique had worked not because of the bond, not because of luck, not because someone had helped him. It had worked because he and Fleur had spent a week in a library working out the precise angle that would make it work, and then he'd executed it. He thought about that. The feeling it produced was not pride exactly, something quieter. More like recognition. He was capable of this. Had been capable of it all along, probably, and was only now starting to believe it. You were extraordinary, Fleur said, quietly, just to him. The technique was yours, he said. The courage to try it on a horntail was entirely yours, she said, which wasn't a compliment so much as a factual correction. She picked up her egg. Let's go. The medical tent is outside and I want to check that you're not actually hurt. I'm fine. You were shaking when you came in. Adrenaline. Yes, which is a physiological response to stress, which means I want someone with medical training to confirm you're fine before you tell me you're fine. Cedric made a noise into his water cup. Harry went to the medical tent. He was, in fact, fine. He also didn't particularly mind going. The aftermath of the first task did something to the social fabric of Hogwarts that no single event since Harry's arrival had quite managed. It made people reconsider their positions in public. The Potter Stinks badges disappeared within 24 hours. Not entirely, Malfoy kept his with the particular stubbornness of someone whose identity was now tangled up in a position he couldn't abandon without losing face, but the other students wearing them had mostly stopped by the morning after the task, when the full score had been posted and the story of what Harry had actually done circulated with the speed that only truly spectacular gossip achieves. He'd walked up to a horntail without a plan to fight it. He'd won by not being a threat. This version of the story got more elaborate with each telling. By lunchtime on the day after, he'd apparently had a full conversation with the dragon. By dinner, some first year had told their friends that the horntail had bowed. Harry had heard both versions and found them funny rather than irritating, which he thought was probably growth of some kind. What was less funny was the meeting Dumbledore called the morning after the task. It was in the headmaster's office, which Harry had been in often enough to know its geography by feel, the portraits of previous headmasters sleeping and waking in their frames, the silver instruments on their spindles, Fawkes on his perch looking at everything with the mild curiosity of a creature who had seen several centuries' worth of human problems and found them all roughly similar. Dumbledore was behind his desk and he invited Harry to sit, which Harry did. "A remarkable performance yesterday," Dumbledore said. "I want to discuss the technique you used." "The presence technique," Harry said. "Quieting the magical signature. Where did you learn it?" "Fleur showed me the principle. I worked out the application." Dumbledore looked at him over his half-moon spectacles with that particular expression that meant he was deciding how much of what he was thinking to share. "The ability to achieve that kind of magical baseline under stress is not easily taught," he said. "Most witches and wizards who can manage it have trained for years." "We had 2 weeks," Harry said. "The bond helped. We used it as feedback." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Outside, Fawkes made a soft sound that wasn't quite a note, more like clearing his throat. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and the tone had changed, become the specific gentleness he deployed when he was about to say something he expected to be difficult to hear. "The bond between you and Miss Delacour. I want to be very clear about something. The bond itself is not dangerous. But the attention it draws might be," Harry said. Dumbledore paused. He didn't look surprised, exactly, more like someone watching a theorem they'd predicted prove itself. "Yes," he said. "There are people watching this tournament who will see the bond as a complexity to be exploited. The kind of leverage that, Dumbledore." Harry kept his voice level. "Not disrespectful, just clear. You know who's in this castle that shouldn't be. Or you have a theory about it. And you're telling me about leverage rather than about the theory." Another pause. The portraits were pretending to be asleep. Harry had noted long ago that Hogwarts portraits were shameless eavesdroppers and that this office, specifically, had more ears than most buildings. "I have a theory," Dumbledore said. "I am not certain enough to share it yet. What I am asking is that you be careful." "I'm always careful." "I know. A beat. I'm asking for a specific kind of care. The bond makes Miss Delacour a potential point of access to you. Not because of anything she has done or would do, but because of what she represents. People who wish you harm may perceive her as a new avenue." Harry sat with this. Sat with the particular sensation of something he'd been carrying quietly becoming explicit in a room with someone else. "I know," he said. "Good." Dumbledore folded his hands. "Then I trust you to act accordingly." He paused. "And Harry, the performance yesterday. The technique, the judgment, the execution. I want you to know that I've watched a great many people face great many challenges. He looked at him with those blue eyes that were always doing something more complex than they appeared to be doing. You are remarkable. Whatever else is true. Harry stood up. He believed it, he thought, because it came with no agenda attached. Dumbledore gave compliments either to motivate or to acknowledge, and this one felt like acknowledgement. Thank you, he said. He went back down the spiral stairs and through the corridor and out into the castle's normal morning noise, and he thought about leverage, and about Fleur, and about what it meant that the same old man who had just called him remarkable had also, very carefully, not told him what his theory was. He found Fleur near the library. She'd been waiting, he realized, or had felt him coming. Both probably. She was leaning against the wall with a book and looked up when she saw him. Dumbledore, she said. He's being careful about what he tells me. He's being careful about what he tells everyone. She pushed off the wall. Madame Maxime spoke to me this morning as well. She said, essentially the same thing. Be careful. The bond makes you visible. Makes both of us visible. Yes. She tucked the book under her arm and they started walking, the corridor falling into step around them the way it always did now, students moving slightly, a small space opening up, not out of fear exactly, more the instinctive spatial response to two people who walk like they know where they're going. I'm not concerned about being visible, she said. I've been visible my entire life. People have always found reasons to look at me. Harry glanced at her. She said it without bitterness, just as a fact. The bond isn't the same as that, he said. No, she agreed. The bond is someone who is actually there. Rather than a version of me they've invented. She paused. That's different. I'm not sure yet what to do with the difference. They walked in quiet for a moment. The November light through the corridor windows was thin and gray, the grounds beyond them bare and cold. The egg, Harry said. Have you figured out the clue? The scream when it opens. She nodded. I've been thinking about it. A puzzle that screams when addressed directly and becomes readable only when approached differently. She tilted her head. Does that remind you of anything? The technique, he said immediately. The technique, she confirmed. Whatever the second task is, I think the egg is telling us that the direct approach won't work. You need to find a different medium. She looked at him sideways. Water, I think. Why? Because the scream sounds like something filtered through a medium that distorts it. Like hearing a voice through a wall. She stopped walking. Open yours tonight. Listen to it again. But think about what it would sound like if the information was meant for a different kind of hearing. He thought about it. Underwater, he said. That's my hypothesis. He looked at her. She was watching him with that direct, unsentimental look, and through the bond he felt her certainty, not arrogance, not performance. The specific warmth of a person who has worked something out and knows it. Do you ever get anything wrong? He said. Frequently, she said. I am simply better than most people at figuring out when I'm getting it wrong before it becomes consequential. She started walking again. Come to the library tonight. Bring the egg. We'll test it. That evening the library held Harry, Fleur, Hermione, and the golden egg, which Hermione had wrapped in a silencing charm to prevent it disturbing the other students while they discussed it. Neville appeared at the table 20 minutes in with a piece of parchment covered in his careful handwriting and sat down and said, quietly, I looked into water-based hearing modification. Mere people. He pushed the parchment across. If you're supposed to listen to it differently, if there's a sound environment that changes what you hear, Harry picked up the parchment. Fleur leaned across to read it with him, which she did unself-consciously, her shoulder against his. Hermione was watching this with an expression she was trying to make look like she was reading her book. The lake, Harry said. There's a Murmish component to the golden egg, Fleur said. The clue is encoded in a frequency that humans can't process in air. Underwater, the auditory range shifts. She straightened. The second task will take place in the lake. In February, said Neville. That's cold, said Hermione, with feeling. Survivable, said Fleur, at the same moment that Harry said, fine, and they looked at each other briefly, and through the bond he felt a thread of shared amusement, clean and uncomplicated, the humor of two people who have independently arrived at the same assessment of a manageable problem. What is it saying? Neville asked. The egg? Harry looked at the silenced golden sphere on the table. Whatever was locked inside it, whatever message it carried, something would be taken. Something would need to be reclaimed. He thought about Dumbledore's word, leverage. He thought about the thing Fleur had said about something taken from you. We'll find out, he said. When we're ready to. Fleur was already pulling a book toward her. Hermione had her quill out. Neville had opened his notebook to a fresh page. The library was warm and quiet around them, and outside the November lake was cold and dark and full of things they hadn't figured out yet, and for the first time in as long as Harry could remember, he wasn't the only person in the room thinking about it. He opened his own notebook and started writing. 3 days later, Ron Weasley sat down across from Harry at breakfast and said, I was wrong. Not about thinking you'd done it, I've known that for a while. But about how I reacted. That was wrong. I'm sorry. Harry looked at him. Ron was red in the face in the way that meant he'd been working up to this for days and was now powering through on sheer momentum. Okay, Harry said. Ron blinked. That's it. You figured it out. You said it. We're done. Harry poured him a cup of tea. What do you think about gillyweed for underwater survival? Ron stared for a moment. Then he grabbed the teacup. I don't know what it is. Hermione does, Harry said. Ask her. The warmth in his chest was steady and even, and not from Ron, though Ron's arrival had produced its own kind of warmth, the simpler, less complicated kind that had been part of his life for 3 years. Through the bond, from somewhere in the castle where Fleur was starting her morning, he felt a flicker that he'd started to identify as her version of contentment. Not happiness exactly, something more settled than happiness. The feeling of a person who has gotten enough sleep and knows what they're doing today. He ate his breakfast. The day was grey and cold outside, and he had charms in an hour, and the second task was 3 months away, and someone in this castle was planning something that neither he nor anyone else could fully see yet. He was looking, though. He and Fleur were both looking. Chapter 4, The Politics of Flame. The Yule Ball announcement hit Hogwarts like a weather event. McGonagall delivered it in Transfiguration with the particular combination of pride and resigned anticipation of someone who had been through this before and had feelings about it that she was professionally obligated not to share. Champions were required to open the ball. Champions needed partners. The ball was on Christmas Eve. She said all of this in the same tone she used for describing the vanishing spell, and then asked if there were questions and got 12 simultaneously, which she addressed by pointing at the door and indicating that the questions could be answered by thinking about them quietly. Harry walked out of Transfiguration and had approximately 45 seconds of peace before the social machinery of Hogwarts began grinding around him. The first person to approach him was a Hufflepuff fourth year named Laura Madley, who asked, with impressive directness, whether he was going to the ball with Fleur, because if not she'd like to go with him. He said he didn't know yet, and she nodded and said fair enough and went away, which was the best possible version of that conversation. The second person was a Gryffindor fifth year who asked him in a roundabout way that took 4 minutes to reach the actual question, which was the same question. He said the same thing. By lunchtime the question had propagated far enough that Ron was fielding versions of it on Harry's behalf, mostly from people asking Ron whether Harry was going with Fleur as a way of getting the answer without having to ask Harry, which Harry found both logical and slightly absurd. Are you going with her? Ron asked, setting his fork down and apparently deciding that he was going to be the one to say the obvious thing. I haven't asked, Harry said. Are you going to? Harry thought about it. The bond had a particular quality when Fleur and he were both thinking about the same thing without discussing it, a resonance he'd started to recognize, like tuning forks in proximity. He'd been feeling it since the morning. She was also thinking about this. He was fairly certain she was having an equally direct conversation somewhere on the Beauxbatons side of things and handling it with rather more efficiency. Probably, he said. Right. Ron picked up his fork again. Only because if you're not, Hermione said I should ask her. He turned slightly red. Hermione said she thought Fleur might say yes. As a partner, nada, he trailed off. As a partner for the ball. Harry looked at him. Do you want to ask Fleur to the ball? That's not, Ron put down his fork again. No. I wanted to ask Hermione. But she said no, and also that I waited too long to ask, and also that Victor Krum had already asked her. Harry blinked. Krum asked Hermione. Apparently. Ron had achieved a shade of red Harry hadn't seen on him before. She said yes. He picked up his fork, put it down again. She seemed like she thought that was a reasonable development. Harry absorbed this. He thought about Krum in the champion's tent, quiet and direct and serious, and he thought about Hermione, who was those same three things and had never quite found someone who spoke her language, and he thought the development was in fact entirely reasonable. He said. Yeah, said Ron. They ate in silence for a moment. So you need a partner, Harry said. Yes. That is the situation. Ask Parvati Patil. Ron opened his mouth, thought about it, closed it. Would she'll say yes, Harry said. She's been to the library 3 times this week to look at the same book we've been using for task research, which means she's been following our work, and when she looks at you she does the thing where she looks away quickly. Harry returned to his food. She'll say yes. Ron stared at him. When did you become, how did you, I pay attention, Harry said. I've always paid attention to things. The bond just made me better at applying it to people. Ron ate his lunch with the expression of someone processing several things. After a while he said, you should ask Fleur today. Before someone else does. Nobody else is going to ask Fleur to the ball. How do you know? Because they're afraid of her, Harry said. And they should probably recalibrate that, but in the meantime, yeah. I'll ask her today. He found her in the corridor outside the Charms classroom at 3 in the afternoon, which was where they developed the habit of briefly crossing paths between afternoon lessons. She was reading while walking, which was a skill he'd watched her deploy multiple times without incident and which still struck him as somewhat implausible. The ball, he said. She closed the book without losing her page and looked at him. Yes. Come with me. As a partner. She examined him for a moment. Through the bond he felt the same resonance he'd been feeling all day, the acknowledgement of a shared thought becoming explicit. Yes, she said. He'd had a longer version of this prepared, had even thought about how to say it in a way that was clear it wasn't just a convenience arrangement, but she'd answered before he'd gotten there. Yes. Yes, she said again, slightly amused. What did you think I would say? I wasn't certain. You felt certain, she said, and tapped the general area of her sternum, indicating the bond. About an hour ago. I felt it. She tucked the book under her arm and started walking again. I have a dress, she said, which meant she'd already thought about the practical side, which tracked. Blue. It will be fine. He walked with her. The castle was doing its between-lesson thing where the corridors were full and then suddenly emptied. There's something else, he said. She glanced at him. The ball isn't just social. In a castle where someone is planning something, a formal event with everyone dressed up and distracted is an excellent opportunity for things to happen. She processed this immediately, no lag at all. You want to use the evening to watch. Watch the people who should be watching us. See who's positioned where. See if anything moves. You're treating it as a reconnaissance event. We can also dance, he said. Both things. The corner of her mouth moved. I am an excellent dancer, she said. I'm Bose Batons trained. We have required dance education from the age of 12. I am not an excellent dancer, Harry said. I know. She glanced at him. I could show you. If you'd like. He thought about the relative dignity of the various options. Yes, he said. That would be useful. Tonight, then. The room on the 7th floor that Hermione told me about. The room of requirement. Yes. She peeled off toward the Bose Batons section of the castle with the same clean efficiency with which she did everything. Over her shoulder, 7 o'clock. The room of requirement, when Harry arrived at 7:05, had arranged itself as a ballroom. Not a grand one, a small, proportionate space with a polished wooden floor and good acoustics and several tall windows that showed only warm darkness beyond them. There was music, which the room had apparently decided to provide from some ambient source, something with a waltz timing that was neither too fast nor too slow. Fleur was already there, and she looked at his face when he came in and said, "Stop thinking about how strange this is and come here." He crossed the floor. She turned to face him and showed him the hold with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had done this many times and saw no reason to make the instruction more complicated than necessary. Her right hand in his left, her left hand on his shoulder, his right hand at her waist. She adjusted his arm position once, then looked at him. "The lead follows the music, not the partner," she said. "You're trying to anticipate me. Don't. Just listen." He listened. The music had a 3-beat pattern that was actually fairly easy to follow when he stopped overthinking it, and Fleur moved with the total unself-consciousness of someone for whom this was as natural as walking. They moved around the small ballroom and he made mistakes and she didn't comment on them, just realigned without making it a correction, and within 15 minutes something that had felt mechanical became something that felt like a conversation. "Better," she said. "You're a good teacher." "I have strong opinions about correct technique," she said. "Which is not the same thing." She turned them through a corner. "How is the gillyweed situation?" "Neville's working on it. There's a greenhouses adjacent lead that he thinks might produce results. The potion stores are another option," she said. "Snape's stores. Getting into Snape's stores would require either permission or breaking in. Moody could provide the former," she said, "and the latter seems within your historical capabilities." He nearly missed a step. "Did you just, I've read about your second year," she said, not quite deadpan but almost. "The chamber. The flying car in first year. The expulsion threat in third." She tilted her head. "You have a pattern. It's always justified," he said. "I know," she said. "That's not a criticism. It's context." She turned them again. The music shifted tempo fractionally and she adjusted to it without appearing to notice. "My point is that we have options for the gillyweed and we should confirm one before January." "Agreed." He watched her for a moment, the way she had of handling multiple things simultaneously without any of them showing signs of being less than fully managed. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "When you came here to Hogwarts, for the tournament, what did you expect?" She thought about it. Actually thought, the way she did, the pause that meant she wasn't performing an answer but constructing one. "I expected a competition," she said. "Technical, dangerous, prestigious. I expected to win. I expected the English students to be, friendly in a formal way, privately skeptical. I expected the Durmstrang boys to be competitive and impolite about it." She paused. "I did not expect the goblet to do what it did." "No. And I did not expect," she stopped. Started again. "I did not expect to find someone who looked at me and saw the thing I was doing rather than the way I looked while doing it." She said it matter-of-factly, without making it into a moment, but through the bond he felt the thing underneath the matter-of-factness, something that had been held very carefully for a long time and was being, cautiously, set down. He didn't say anything immediately. The music moved through its pattern and they moved through the ballroom, and outside the windows the dark was warm and complete. People see whatever they're looking for, he said, finally. Most people look for the same thing. Most people aren't paying proper attention. He turned them through another corner. My whole life, until Hogwarts, people saw a problem child. A troubled boy from a difficult home. Because that's what they were looking for. Hermione was the first person who actually looked at what I was doing instead of what they expected me to be doing. Fleur was quiet for a moment. And now? Now you, he said. Which is the same thing from a different direction. The music settled into a slower tempo and they slowed with it, and at some point the space between them had closed to something different from the formal ballroom distance, not dramatically, just closer, the way things that are in proximity tend toward each other when neither person is actively resisting. Harry, she said. Yeah. You're not afraid of me. She said it not as a compliment but as an observation, still faintly puzzled by it, the way you're puzzled by a law of physics that keeps being true. Should I be? Most people are. Not self-satisfied about it, just factual. The Vila component, the reputation, the competitive, whatever they call it. It makes them careful. They watch themselves around me. I watch myself around plenty of people, he said. Not out of fear. Just awareness. Same as I do with everyone. He looked at her directly. You're not frightening to me. You're someone I want to understand. She looked at him for a long moment. Through the bond, something that had been held at a particular careful distance moved fractionally closer. Not dramatically. Just fractionally. Like a threshold being acknowledged. The music ended. They stood still in the small ballroom for a moment, still and hold, and then separated with the natural ease of people who are learning to be comfortable with each other rather than performing comfort. Same time Thursday, she said, to practice again. Same time Thursday, he agreed. She went toward the door. At the threshold she paused. For what it's worth, she said, without turning, the thing you said about looking at what someone is doing. You were the first person to ask me about the technique. About the work. Not about the heritage, not about the Vila inheritance, not about what it feels like, about the work. She looked back briefly. That was the first time. She went out. He stood in the room for a minute after she left, listening to the room's ambient music wind down to silence. The bond was warm and steady and present, and the feeling it carried from Fleur's direction was not happiness exactly, something older and more deliberate than happiness. The feeling of a door that has been locked for a long time being found unlocked. He went back to his dormitory and didn't tell Ron any of this, but Ron looked at his face when he came in and said, "All right," and Harry said, "Yeah," and Ron nodded and went back to his charms essay, and that was enough. Barty Crouch Sr. collapsed on the Hogwarts grounds 3 days before the Yule Ball. Harry didn't see it happen, but he heard about it from every direction within about 6 hours, which was the speed at which news traveled in a school that had 500 students and minimal entertainment. What the news said was, Crouch had appeared at the edge of the forest, disoriented, speaking nonsense, and had been found by Victor Crumb, who had come to get Dumbledore, and in the time it took Crumb to get Dumbledore and come back, Crouch had disappeared. Harry sat with this information the way he sat with all information that didn't add up. He held it still and looked at it from multiple angles. Crouch Sr. had been behaving strangely all term. Absent from the weighing of the wand ceremony when his attendance was expected, absent from several other official functions, represented at the tournament by his assistant, the permanently cheerful Percy-adjacent figure of his personal secretary. Now he'd appeared in a state of apparent breakdown and then vanished before anyone could properly speak to him. He mentioned it to Fleur that evening. She'd had the same response, she'd heard it, held it still, and arrived at a conclusion he was going to arrive at independently. He knows something, she said. Something that's pulling him here. He didn't come to the school. He came to someone. Dumbledore. Who else? He's the only person here with the authority and independence to act on what Crouch might know. She paused. What does Crouch Sr. know about this tournament that nobody else does? Harry thought. He's on the organizing committee. He'd know the security arrangements around the goblet. He'd know who had access. Which means if he knows who put your name in, Fleur said, he came here to tell someone. And didn't make it. She looked at him. Something stopped him. Something or someone. In this castle. They both sat with that for a moment. The library was quiet around them, the late evening population of students mostly gone. Hermione had left an hour ago. Neville had gone even earlier. Moody, Harry said. What about him? He's the one who found us the morning after the announcement. He told us useful things. Gave us the right framing. Harry was thinking through it carefully. But he was also there the night Crouch's name came from the goblet. And he was one of the first people to see the bond declaration. Fleur was watching him with that direct attention. You're suspicious of Moody. I'm suspicious of everyone, Harry said. That's not the same as accusing him. But Moody has been he's given us exactly the right amount of information at exactly the right times. Like someone who wants us useful and careful without us getting too close to something. Or, Fleur said, like someone who genuinely wants us to survive and knows more than he's saying. Yeah, Harry said. Could be both. He leaned back in his chair. Dumbledore trusts him. Relatively. Dumbledore trusts everyone relatively. A beat of silence, and then they both made the same sound, not quite a laugh, more the quiet release of recognizing the same absurdity simultaneously, and the sound of it in the empty library was something different from what had been there before. Something lighter. Christmas Eve arrived with frost on the windows and the smell of pine through the castle and Hogwarts looking like a painting of itself, every torch lit, every surface carrying some form of decoration, the enchanted ceiling of the great hall showing a clear and starlit night. The ball started at 8. Harry came down to the great hall entrance hall in dress robes that Hermione had helped him select after describing, with specific precision, why his original choice was the wrong one. They were dark green, well-fitted, and he felt in them the specific quality of wearing something appropriate rather than something borrowed. Parvati was meeting Ron at the bottom of the stairs and both of them were navigating the first 2 minutes of a formal event with the particular careful energy of people who are pleased to be there and slightly unsure about what the rest of it will be. He waited near the champion's entrance. Fleur arrived with the other Beauxbatons girls but separated from the group at the door with a natural ease that suggested she'd always known exactly where she was going. She was wearing blue, as promised, a deep particular blue that had the quality of still water at depth, formal enough for the occasion and cut with the kind of elegant precision that didn't announce itself. Her hair was up, pinned in a way that had the appearance of effortlessness that Harry already knew took significant work. She looked at him once, top to bottom, and said, "Good. The green is correct. You look," he started to say beautiful and recognized it as both true and insufficient. "You look exactly like yourself," he said. "Which is the best version of that?" She looked at him differently then, not the assessment look, not the direct observation look, something with more texture to it. "Thank you," she said, and it had weight. Cedric and his partner, Cho Chang, were already at the head of the champions line. Cho was in silver robes and had the particular composed quality of someone who knew they looked wonderful and had decided not to make it a thing. Cedric looked like the platonic ideal of a Hogwarts champion, tall, unscorched, perfectly at ease. He caught Harry's eye and smiled. Krum arrived with Hermione and the sight of Hermione in dress robes stopped Ron briefly in his tracks at the far side of the entrance hall. She'd done something with her hair and she walked with the confidence of someone who had made a deliberate set of choices and was standing behind all of them. Krum was in Durmstrang formal robes, dark red and severe, and he had his hand on Hermione's arm with the careful attentiveness of someone who had thought about exactly how to do that and was doing it correctly. "She looks wonderful," said Fleur, noting Harry's expression. "She always does," Harry said. "She just usually doesn't want anyone to notice." Fleur smiled, full, real, not the precursor. She and I have been talking, she said, as if this was casual information. He looked at her. When? Several times this week. In the library, briefly. She is, Fleur searched for the right word. She is the most systematically thorough person I have encountered who is not a professional academic. She had questions about the bond. Historical, theoretical questions. I answered them. What kind of questions? Careful ones. Fleur's expression was doing something warmly complicated. The kind a person asks when they love someone and want to understand what is happening to them. The door opened. The champions moved forward into the great hall's decorated warmth, and the noise of 500 people doing what 500 people do at formal events rolled over them, and Harry and Fleur walked in together, and the thing that happened in the room was less like an entrance and more like a statement. He felt it in the way attention directed itself, the way the crowd's noise shifted and reformed, the way Dumbledore at the high table looked up from a conversation with Madame Maxime and said something to her, and she looked at Harry and Fleur and nodded once. Ready? Fleur said, quietly, beside him. Absolutely, he said. The opening dance had a specific logic to it now that he had actual preparation behind him. He found the music's beat before he stepped onto the floor and didn't lose it, and Fleur moved with him with the complete ease of someone who had made herself an expert at something so long ago she no longer had to think about it. They moved through the opening measure and he felt the crowd watching and didn't care about it, and through the bond there was something from Fleur that was fun, actually. She was genuinely enjoying this, the movement and the music and the warmth of the hall, and the enjoyment was unguarded in a way that most of her states were not. You've improved significantly, she said, over his shoulder. I had a good teacher. You had strong opinions about correct technique, she said, returning his earlier phrasing exactly, and he almost misstepped. They danced through the opening, and then other couples joined the floor, and the formal structure of the opening gave way to something more general, and they found a table with Cedric and Cho and sat down. Cho was perceptive. Harry had gathered that much from Cedric's description of her, but sitting across from her for 20 minutes while the conversation moved through the ball and the tournament and lighter things, he could see it in action. She asked questions that sounded casual and had depth in them. She listened with the specific quality of someone who is tracking the texture of an answer, not just its content. She was watching Fleur with interest that was neither competitive nor unkind, more the interest of someone deciding what category to put her in. The harmonic technique, Cho said, eventually, when the conversation had found its way there. In the arena. I could hear it from the stands. I didn't know what it was, but it was. She paused. It changed how the space felt. Everyone near me went quiet. A side effect, Fleur said. When the control is imprecise, the harmonic affects more than the target. I was more focused on the dragon than on limiting the spread. Can you do it now? Cho asked. Fleur looked at her. Not without choosing to, she said. It requires deliberate activation. I'm not a passive effect. Cho nodded, satisfied. She looked at Harry. You and she are, you work together very naturally. We've had good reason to, Harry said. The bond, said Cho. Partially, Harry said. Mostly we just think similarly. Cedric was watching this exchange with the easy observational warmth of someone who likes watching people understand things. He caught Harry's eye briefly, and the look he gave was the look of someone who sees clearly and approves of what they're seeing. Harry excused himself at 9:30 to go get drinks, and it was on his way back from the drinks table that he saw Malfoy. Malfoy was in a corner of the hall that was slightly behind a column, and he wasn't dancing and he wasn't with anyone, and he was doing the watching thing, the specific cataloging attention that Harry had noticed weeks ago. But tonight he wasn't watching Harry and Fleur. He was watching Moody. Moody was across the room, also not dancing, positioned near one of the decorative archways with his flask in hand and his magical eye doing its constant slow circuit. He was watching the room with the general paranoid attention that seemed to be his resting state, and Harry had been about to not think much of this when he noticed what Moody was actually watching. He was watching Professor Dumbledore. Not the way you watch a colleague or a superior, the way you watch someone when you're monitoring them. Specific, patient, calibrated. The magical eye was doing the thing where it moved slightly independent of the real one, occasionally looking through walls, and the real one was on Dumbledore, who was deep in conversation with Karkaroff near the musicians. Harry stood with his drinks and put the pieces together in order. Crouch Sr. appearing and disappearing. Someone with access to the goblet. Moody watching Dumbledore watching Karkaroff. Malfoy watching Moody. He went back to the table and set the drinks down and leaned to Fleur and said, quietly, in her ear, "Don't look immediately. When you get a chance, Malfoy, behind the column to your left. Then Moody, near the archway at the back. Then Karkaroff." She didn't look immediately. She picked up her drink, spoke normally to Cho about something inconsequential for 30 seconds, and then turned her head with the natural ease of someone looking across a busy room and taking in the general crowd. She came back to the table. Under the noise of the music and the crowd she said, "Karkaroff is nervous." "Yes. He's been nervous all evening. Different nervous from before. Something changed recently." Crouch collapsing, Harry said. "Karkaroff knew about it or caused it and isn't sure which consequences are coming. And Moody is watching him because Moody has the same theory about the tournament's insider that I do," Harry said. "But I don't know which name he's landed on." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "There's something else," she said. "About Moody." She picked up her drink. "I've been watching his flask. He drinks from it constantly. He drinks from it I've counted, every 37 minutes, within a few minutes. Which suggests a potion with a required dosage interval rather than habitual drinking." She looked at him. "What potion needs to be taken every 30 minutes to maintain its effects?" Harry thought. The answer surfaced slowly, then all at once, with the specific weight of something that rearranges everything around it once it lands. "Polyjuice potion," he said. The name sat between them and they both sat with what it meant. "It might not be that," Fleur said, but carefully, in the tone of someone checking a conclusion rather than dismissing it. "No," Harry said. "But if it is, then the person teaching defense against the dark arts this year is not Alastor Moody. And the person teaching defense against the dark arts this year is the one who put my name in the goblet." The music moved through its pattern around them. The hall was warm and full and entirely unaware of the conversation happening at this table in the middle of it. "We need more information before we say anything," Fleur said. "Agreed. We can't get the information tonight." "Agreed. So tonight," she stood, and held out her hand. "Tonight we dance. And tomorrow we start figuring out who is wearing Moody's face." He took her hand. They went back to the floor. The music was something slower and she took the proper hold with the automatic ease of practice and they moved through it and Harry was doing two things simultaneously, feeling the music and the warmth of the bond and the specific uncomplicated reality of dancing with someone he genuinely liked, and also running through everything he knew about Polyjuice potion and who might be using it and what it meant. Neither thing interfered with the other. He'd always been able to hold multiple things at once. "You're still thinking about it," she said. "Half thinking," he said. "Half here. That's acceptable." She guided them through a turn. "For what it's worth, my half is the same." They danced. Across the room Hermione and Krum moved through the same music with the careful attentiveness of two people who were, whether they'd said so yet or not, finding each other good company. Ron was dancing with Parvati with the specific effortful quality of someone who had listened to Harry's advice about asking her and was now working very hard to not mess it up. Cedric and Cho were having a conversation while dancing, the kind where both people are talking with their full selves not just their mouths. At the far end of the room, half in the archway, the person wearing Moody's face watched the room with two mismatched eyes and drank from a flask and thought whatever thoughts were behind that scarred and borrowed face, and Harry and Fleur moved through the music and watched everything and said nothing yet, because saying nothing was the right play until you had enough. At 11, when the ball began winding down and couples drifted toward the exits and the music slowed to something final, Fleur said, "We're getting close to something." "Yeah," Harry said. "Things will get worse before the second task." "They always do." She looked at him, the direct look, the one that saw him rather than what she expected, and through the bond the feeling it carried was not the cautious measured distance of the first weeks. It was something that had been moving closer by degrees, a warmth that had texture and weight, the kind that happens between two people who have been through things together and come through them intact. "I know," she said. And then, quietly, because the music was ending and the hall was beautiful and the night was Christmas Eve and some things were allowed to be said simply, "I'm glad the goblet did what it did." He held that for a moment. The music finished. Around them couples separated and the hall began its post-midnight migration toward dormitories and corridors. "Yeah," he said, and meant it completely. "Me too." They went out separately, Beauxbatons and Gryffindor, different towers, different staircases, but through the bond as the distance grew between them the warmth didn't diminish. It settled, instead, into something more permanent. The difference between a fire and a hearthstone, one burns, one holds heat. He went up to the Gryffindor tower and changed out of the green dress robes and sat on his bed in the dark and thought about Polyjuice Potion and Crouch and Karkaroff and Voldemort and all the things converging on a point he couldn't see yet, and the bond was warm and steady and present, and eventually he slept. On the 28th of December, he wrote Sirius a letter. He described the Polyjuice theory carefully, the flask timing, the behavioral patterns he'd noted. He described Crouch's appearance and disappearance. He said he thought the pieces were related. He sent the letter with Hedwig and watched her go from the Ollery window into the cold January sky and felt the specific patience of someone who has sent a thing into the world and is now waiting for the world to respond. Fleur appeared beside him. She'd come up the tower stairs while he was watching Hedwig diminish to a speck and become sky. "Godfather," she said. "He'll know what to do with the information." She stood beside him at the window, both of them looking out at the winter grounds. "Gabrielle is coming," she said. "She'll be here for the second task as a spectator with some of the other Beauxbatons families. You'll want to see her." "Very much." The warmth in the bond for her sister was always the same, unguarded, complete, like a clear note struck cleanly. "She'll want to meet you," she added. "Should I be worried about that?" Fleur considered this. "She'll have strong opinions," she said. "And she'll share them immediately and without framing." She paused. "She's 9. "I'll manage," Harry said. The cold came off the window glass in a slow wave and they stood there in the Ollery with the smell of birds and old straw and winter, watching the sky where Hedwig had been, and the days were counting down toward February and the lake and the second task, and there was someone in this castle wearing a dead man's face, and somewhere Voldemort was not dead and not dormant, and Harry was standing here in the quiet with Fleur Delacour and felt, not invulnerable, nothing as simple as that. More like someone who has found their footing on uncertain ground. Someone who has located the center of gravity and knows how to come back to it. He'd go back to thinking about all of it in a minute. For now, the sky, the cold, the warmth beside him. That was enough. Chapter 5, The Lake Below Zero. February came in like a fist. The grounds of Hogwarts went from winter cold to genuinely hostile overnight, frost on the inside of the dormitory windows, the lake surface gone pewter gray and opaque, the kind of cold that doesn't so much drop as arrive, settling over everything with the finality of a decision. Harry woke on the morning of the second task and lay still for 60 seconds listening to the silence and feeling through the bond. Fleur was awake. Had been for a while. The quality coming through was tightly controlled, not fear, something more like the state of a person who has been sitting with a difficult knowledge for hours and has processed it into a kind of readiness. He'd felt this from her before the first task and recognized it now. She was ready. The readiness had edges. He got up and dressed and went down to breakfast and found Neville waiting for him at the Gryffindor table with a small cloth package that he passed across the table with the particular expression of someone who has done something useful and is pleased but trying not to show it too fully. "Gillyweed," Neville said, quietly. Harry unwrapped the package. Inside was a handful of something that looked like wet gray-green seaweed, slightly rubbery, smelling of salt and very cold water. Neville, Professor Sprout had a batch in greenhouse for that she was cultivating for potion study next year, Neville said. I asked her if I could look at it for my herbology project on adaptive magical aquatic flora and she said yes, and while I was in there I took enough for the task. He looked at Harry steadily. I know that's technically not authorized. It's brilliant, Harry said. Neville nodded. You eat it all at once, about a minute before you enter the water. Should give you an hour. Maybe a bit more with your magical output. He looked at the package. I read everything I could find about the dosage. Based on your size and metabolic rate, Neville. Harry put his hand briefly on Neville's arm. Thank you. Neville went slightly pink. Don't die in a lake, he said, and picked up his toast. Hermione arrived with her own stack of notes, which she'd apparently been compiling since 6 in the morning, and began rapid-firing through information she'd already told him twice. He let her. She needed to say it and he didn't mind hearing it again, and the third pass through a thing sometimes produced something the first two missed. It did this time. She mentioned, briefly, that the thing taken from each champion would be something precious and irreplaceable, and added, almost as a parenthetical, that the obvious candidates were people rather than objects, and who those people might be. He'd known this was likely. They'd discussed it. He and Fleur had worked it out 2 weeks ago in the library from the egg's message and the tournament's pattern of escalating personal cost. But hearing Hermione say it made it concrete in a way the intellectual working out hadn't. Someone would be taken into the lake tonight. His first thought, immediate and unbidden, Fleur. Then, right behind it, or Gabrielle. Fleur's sister had arrived 3 days ago, and Harry had met her in the entrance hall while Fleur was mid-embrace with a small girl with silver blonde hair and enormous eyes who had pulled back from the embrace to look at Harry with the absolute unfiltered directness of a 9-year-old making an assessment. You're Harry, Gabrielle had said. Not a question. Yes, he'd said. Fleur says you are not afraid of her. Gabrielle had tilted her head. Nobody says this. Usually they say she is beautiful, which she is, but that is not what makes her Fleur. She delivered this judgment with the complete confidence of someone who had thought about it carefully and arrived at a conclusion and saw no reason to soften it. I think you are right that she is not frightening. She's not to me, Harry had said. Gabrielle had nodded, satisfied, and gone back to Fleur, and Fleur had looked at Harry over Gabrielle's head with an expression that was equal parts one told you she'd have opinions and thank you for that answer. Now, sitting at breakfast with the gillyweed in his pocket and the February cold pressing through the castle walls, Harry thought, if the thing taken from Fleur is Gabrielle, she'll be in the lake, and the cold will be dangerous for a 9-year-old, and Fleur will know it and will be carrying it this whole morning. He felt through the bond. Found Fleur. Found the tight controlled quality of her readiness, and underneath it, yes, a thread of something that wasn't fear for herself. Something sharper. Fear for someone else. He pushed back through the bond. Not words, not images, just a quality of presence, the thing he'd learned to do. I know. I'm here. The tight quality settled slightly. Not resolved, just, acknowledged. The lake at 10 in the morning looked like something from a painting of winter, still, gray, completely opaque from the surface. The stands had been erected along the shore and were filling with students and staff and a number of visitors who'd arrived for the task, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. Bagman was at the start line with his sonorous already active, saying things about tradition and challenge that Harry was not listening to. The champions stood together at the water's edge. Cedric looked like he'd had about as much sleep as Harry, not unslept, just the particular alertness of someone running on adrenaline rather than rest. He had a plan, Harry could see it in his posture. Something thought through and executed at the right moment, Cedric's mode of operation. He caught Harry's eye and said, quietly, Gillyweed or Bubblehead? Gillyweed, Harry said. You. Bubblehead. He looked at the lake. Better visibility. But slower. He paused. Chose down there. I know. Harry didn't say the rest of it. Crumb was standing with his arms at his sides, already in the particular internal space he went to before things, not absent, more focused inward. He would partially transfigure himself, Harry knew, from the research they'd done. Shark head. Brutal and effective in the way that most of Crumb's solutions were. Fleur was next to Harry. She'd been next to him since the champions assembled, and she was standing close enough that he could feel the cold radiating off her outer robes, and through the bond the quality was different now than it had been this morning, tighter, sharper, aimed. She'd taken whatever she'd been carrying since before dawn and compressed it into fuel. He could feel it burning. Gabrielle is in the lake, she said. Not a question. Probably, he said. Or someone else from Beau's Batons. I don't know. It's Gabrielle, she said, with the certainty of someone who knows their own fear. I felt her absence this morning before I knew what it meant. He turned to look at her. She was watching the lake with those gray eyes currently the color of the water. I'll get her if I reach her first, he said. She looked at him. The look had the quality of something she didn't quite know how to respond to, not because she doubted him, but because the offer was large enough that it required a moment to hold properly. The rules, she started. Say champions are graded on speed and the recovery of their own person, Harry said. Nothing about what else they do while they're down there. A pause. Harry, I know where I'm going, he said. And I'm fast in the water. If I get there first, I get them both. If you get there first, you do. He met her eyes. We don't leave people in a frozen lake. She looked at him for 3 seconds, and he felt through the bond something that moved through the tight controlled readiness like a current through still water, warm, immediate, not something she'd manufactured but something that had been there and had just been addressed directly for the first time. Thank you, she said. It was the same weight it had when she'd said it after the ball. More weight, now. Bagman called them to the water's edge. Harry put the gillyweed in his mouth. It tasted like cold seawater and something vegetal and not particularly good, but he chewed it and swallowed and felt the effect begin, his neck tightening, his hands changing, the gills opening along his throat with a sensation that was strange but not painful. His hands were webbed between the fingers by the time the cannon sounded. He went in. The lake was a different world. He'd been here before, briefly, in second year for a class exercise with Neville and the bubotuber plants in the shallows. That had been summer and warm and shallow. This was none of those things. The water was the temperature of deep winter and the light was the thin blue-gray of 10 feet below the surface in February, and the only reason it wasn't immediately miserable was that the gillyweed had modified his thermal tolerance along with his respiratory system. He oriented downward and swam. The lake's population watched him without concern, grindylows at the edges, moving away from his wake, and in the deeper water the larger shapes of things he chose not to investigate. He swam with the full efficiency of the webbed hands and the enhanced lung capacity, faster than he'd been in any previous water, and the gillyweed's modification had also sharpened his underwater vision in a way he hadn't expected, the colors resolving through the murk more clearly than normal eyes managed. He followed the sound. There was a sound in the lake, he'd known there would be from the egg's clue, a murmish call that he couldn't fully translate but which pulled at his navigation instincts the way a bell pulls toward its source. He went down and slightly north of his entry point and the light got stranger and the water got colder and the lake bottom began to appear below him as a landscape. It looked like a village. Stone structures in the silt, weed-grown and barnacled, with windows and doorways and the suggestion of organization, a settlement, organized, inhabited. He'd known Hogwarts had mere people but knowing and seeing were different things, and he moved through the outskirts of their village with the careful respect of a guest who has arrived uninvited and knows it. The mere people watched him. From doorways and open spaces between the structures, gray-skinned figures with green-dark hair moved to watch him pass. They didn't stop him. One of them said something in Murmish that carried the cadence of a test or a challenge, and he said, in Parseltongue, which he'd realized last week was possibly the most adjacent language in his toolkit for non-human speech, not the same but sharing some tonal logic, something that he hoped translated to looking for the hostages, not here to cause trouble. Whether it translated or not, the mere people stepped back. He kept moving. He found the hostages tied to a stone pillar in a wider plaza at the center of the village, secured with what looked like kelpie weed but was more likely a magical binding with similar physical form. 4 of them, underwater, apparently asleep rather than drowning. Grip hook logic, he thought, the tournament wouldn't actually kill its hostages, they were deep sleeping with a magical preservation working on them. He recognized all of them. Cho Chang. Ron Weasley. Victor Crumb's handler's young nephew, a boy he didn't know. And Gabrielle. Gabrielle was the smallest of the 4 by a significant margin, 9 years old and small for her age, her silver blonde hair floating in the water around her with the particular still quality of sleep that was too deep. She was pale in the cold water. Pale in a way that made him move faster. He reached the pillar and pulled out his wand. The binding on Ron was the most accessible, he cut it with a slicing charm and caught Ron before he could drift and got an arm under him and looked at the column. Ron first, then, he looked at Gabrielle, and then toward the direction he'd come from, and then back. 2 people. He could manage 2. He cut Gabrielle's binding and caught her too, one arm under Ron who was broader and heavier, one hand on Gabrielle who was small enough to hold against him, and looked at the remaining 2, Cho and the Durmstrang boy, and assessed the distance to the surface, his remaining gillyweed time, and the probability that Cedric and Crumb were already on their way here. The mere people had gathered around the plaza. One of them, older, with the authority of position in the way they held their body, said something in Mermish that was long and complex and Harry couldn't fully parse but which seemed to be about the remaining hostages. He looked at the Mermish elder. He said, very carefully, in the nearest language he had, I take 2, the others follow, no more time. The elder looked at him for a long moment. Then inclined their head, once, in a gesture that wasn't quite human but carried the unmistakable meaning of acknowledgement. He went up. The ascent was faster than the descent because he wasn't navigating, just rising, and because he was burning energy on the kind of focused urgency that bypasses cold and distance. His arms were full and Gabrielle was lighter than he'd feared and Ron was making small sounds that meant he was somewhere between deep sleep and consciousness, and the grey-blue water lightened as he rose through it toward the surface. He broke the surface 12 feet from the marked area where the rescue was supposed to conclude, and the cold air hit him like a wall and the crowd noise was immediate and enormous. He got to the bank. Someone, he identified it as Fleur's voice before he registered that she was in the shallows herself, still in her outer robes, soaking, which meant she'd entered the water at some point and been forced back by something. Fleur's voice, close and sharp, and then her hands were there, taking Gabrielle from him, pulling her out of the water and onto the bank in one smooth motion. He got Ron out and stood up and the cold was full on now without the gillyweed's thermal modification, which he could feel fading. He registered, both of them were breathing. Gabrielle was coughing and awake, wrapping herself around Fleur's neck with both arms with the complete physical trust of a child who has found the right person. Ron was sitting up with the expression of someone who has just been very cold for a long time and is deciding how to feel about it. You're all right, Harry said, to Ron. M'all right, Ron said. He looked at the lake, then at Harry, then back at the lake. Was there a squid? Yes, Harry said. Great, said Ron. Yeah, all right. Harry turned. Fleur was on the bank with Gabrielle, wrapping her in a robe that appeared from somewhere. A Beauxbatons student had run forward with one, and Gabrielle was talking very fast in French that Harry couldn't fully follow but which had the rhythm of I wasn't scared, I was fine, you didn't need to, and Fleur was listening with her face pressed briefly to the top of Gabrielle's head and not saying anything. Then Fleur looked up. At him. The distance between them was 6 feet and the bond between them was louder than it had been since the first night in the Great Hall, not the background warmth but a full transmission, unheld, everything present. He felt her, not translated, not summarized, just felt her, the complete texture of what she was experiencing, relief so sharp it had the quality of pain, the specific terror of knowing someone you love was in cold water and being physically prevented from reaching them, and underneath all of that something that had been moving toward him for weeks arriving, finally, without hedges or management. She stood up. Gabrielle clung to her arm and she let her, but she was looking at Harry and she crossed the 6 feet between them and did something she hadn't done yet, which was put both arms around him. It wasn't the formal hold of dancing. It was a person who had been afraid pressing themselves against the person who had been in the water and come back. He put his arms around her in return and they stood on the bank of the frozen lake with the crowd making noise around them and Gabrielle attached to Fleur's left arm saying something with French exclamation points in it and Ron somewhere behind Harry making "oh right okay then" noises. She pulled back before it became a scene. She was Fleur, she didn't make scenes. But she looked at him at close range with those gray eyes and said, "Thank you," for the 3rd time, and this time the weight of it was different from both previous times. This time it was not for a specific action. It was larger than that. "You'd have gotten to her," he said. "I was blocked," she said, with a flash of something in her face, not exactly anger, the residue of it. Grindylows. A larger population than the maps showed, at the boundary of the deep section. She stopped. "It took too long." "You're here." "She's here." "It's fine." She looked at him for one more second and then, with the slight squaring of the shoulders that meant she was returning to herself, stepped back and turned to Gabrielle. "I told you not to follow me," she said, in English for Harry's benefit, to Gabrielle. Gabrielle looked up at her with wide eyes. "I didn't follow you. I was taken." "You know what I mean," Fleur said, and it made no logical sense but it was clearly the continuation of a much older conversation. Harry looked out at the lake. Cedric had broken the surface with Cho 2 minutes after him, he'd heard the cheer from the crowd, and Crumb had surfaced with the Durmstrang boy a minute after that, having apparently used the partial transfiguration to move fast enough to make up for navigating with a shark's head. All hostages out, all champions intact. The scores came in. Harry had been docked points for taking 2 hostages rather than 1, which Bagman announced with the apologetic tone of someone who had made the rule without thinking through its implications in a scenario where a competitor was both fast enough and inclined to be decent. He got 43. Cedric got 45. Crumb got 42. Fleur had been awarded 35 for not completing the task, which produced a sound from the Beauxbatons section of the stands that Harry categorized as deeply unimpressed. "The Grindylows weren't accounted for," Fleur said, looking at her score with an expression of controlled frustration. "The distribution near the deep boundary was incorrect in every map I was given. I was not slow. I was blocked." "Write a formal objection," Harry said. "I intend to." She looked at the judges' table. Dumbledore's score alone was generous enough to suggest he noticed something was wrong with the obstacle distribution. She paused. "Karkaroff gave me 6. Karkaroff gave Cedric 4 and me 8, Harry said. "He's not subtle about it." She made a sound that was too controlled to be called a snort but was in that direction. Gabrielle had found a dry blanket from somewhere and was sitting on the bank wrapped in it, watching Harry with the same wide-eyed unsettling directness she'd had in the entrance hall. "You went back for me," she said, to Harry. Not accusatory, more like she was collecting facts. "Yes," Harry said. "Why?" "Because you were there." Gabrielle looked at Fleur. Then back at Harry. "Fleur says when people do things they should not have to do for people they do not have an obligation to, it usually means they already feel the obligation." She appeared to be quoting this verbatim, which suggested Fleur had said it at some point with some emphasis. "Do you feel the obligation?" "Gabrielle," said Fleur. "I'm asking." "Yes," Harry said, to Gabrielle. "I do." Gabrielle nodded with the satisfaction of a hypothesis confirmed. She tucked herself back into her blanket. Harry looked at Fleur, who was looking at her sister with the expression that was unmistakably she gets this from her father. Sirius's reply arrived on a Wednesday, 6 days after the second task. The letter came with Hedwig at breakfast and Harry read it under the table while Hermione talked to Fleur about the Beauxbatons' approach to theoretical transfiguration, which had become a thing they did, found a subject and ran it to interesting places, two people who thought at similar speeds finding the exercise mutually useful. Sirius had written in the tight compressed hand that meant he was being careful about what he put to paper. The letter said, Barty Crouch Jr. The name has been circulating in dark places since before your first year. Crouch Sr. used Veritaserum to convict his own son and watched him go to Azkaban. The son was supposed to die there. He didn't. Someone got him out. And then, the person wearing Moody's face, I think you're right. Crouch Jr. is devoted in the particular way that people who sacrificed everything for a cause are devoted. He won't stop. Tell Dumbledore. Harry put the letter away and said nothing for 60 seconds while he sat with it and assembled it against everything else he had. Barty Crouch Jr. in the castle since September, wearing Moody's face, feeding information, to Harry, deliberately, calibrated information. Keeping them useful without letting them get too close. Managing the tournament from inside it. The Grindylows that had blocked Fleur, the unusual distribution, that might have been accidental, or it might have been Crouch adjusting the task to ensure Harry's path was clear. Ensuring Harry survived each task, because Crouch needed Harry to survive, needed him to reach the third task, needed him at the end of whatever this was building toward. He leaned toward Fleur. Quiet, under the breakfast noise. Sirius confirmed it. Barty Crouch Jr. She didn't react visibly. Who is he? Death Eater. Azkaban escapee. His father convicted him. Harry kept his voice flat and level. He's been in this castle all year. He's been managing us. A pause. Fleur set her fork down. He helped us, she said, and it had the quality of something being properly evaluated rather than dismissed. Yes, Harry said. He also blocked you in the lake. Or allowed it. He needed me to complete the task, not you. Fleur's expression did something controlled and precise. He needed a specific outcome from each task. He needs me alive at the end of the third task, Harry said. Whatever the third task leads to, that's where this is going. Voldemort, she said. She said the name without hesitation, which he'd noticed she did. She was not British trained in that particular fear. Voldemort, he agreed. Another pause. We need to tell Dumbledore, she said. Tonight, he said. Privately. Not in a staff meeting, not through official channels, because Crouch has had access to those channels all year. She nodded. I'll come with you. Yes, he said. She picked up her fork. Eat your breakfast. He ate his breakfast. Dumbledore listened to them in his office that evening without interrupting. He listened the way he did things, with his complete attention and his hands still and his face giving nothing away except that he was genuinely engaged, every word being received and processed. When they were done he was quiet for a moment. You've been thorough, he said. Both of you. He looked at his hands. The flask timing. The Grindylow distribution in the second task. Crouch Sr.'s appearance. He paused. And Sirius's confirmation. Is it actionable? Fleur asked. It requires care, Dumbledore said. If we act too directly, too visibly, we risk alerting Crouch that he's been identified, and a cornered man with a fully formed plan is more dangerous than one who thinks he's undetected. He looked at them. What I need you to understand, and I need you to hear this precisely, is that I believe the third task is the convergence point. Whatever Crouch has been working toward all year will execute there. We'll be in the maze, Harry said. Yes. And something in the maze will funnel me toward a specific destination. Dumbledore was quiet. What's at the end? Harry said. Another pause. Longer than the others, and in the length of it Harry heard the specific silence of a man weighing how much truth to give, how much to hold back, and arriving at the conclusion that more truth was less dangerous than less. A port key, Dumbledore said. If I'm right. Designed to take you somewhere specific at the moment you reach it. Which means the maze will have been modified to ensure you reach it. He looked at both of them. Which also means we can modify the maze back. We need to know where the portkey goes, Fleur said. I have a theory, Dumbledore said. The same theory you had before the first task that you didn't share, Harry said, without heat. Dumbledore met his eyes. Yes. A pause. I'm going to share it now. He placed his hands flat on the desk. Tom Riddle's family home is in Little Hangleton. It is a place of significance to Voldemort's history and to the magic he would use for a physical resurrection. If Crouch is working toward restoring his master, then the portkey goes there, Fleur said. That is my theory. The office was quiet. Fawkes shifted on his perch, a small adjustment of weight, and the silver instruments did their slow spinning, and outside the February night pressed cold against the windows. Crouch goes in the maze too, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. He's been in the castle all year. He's been watching. He'll want to be close when it happens. Harry was working through it as he spoke, the pieces aligning. He'll be in the maze. That is likely, Dumbledore said. Then we can stop it in the maze, Harry said. If you know what to look for, Dumbledore said. If you're prepared. We've been preparing since September, Fleur said, and the matter-of-factness of it was the most complete answer possible. Dumbledore looked at them both for a long moment. Outside Fawkes made that almost note sound again, and the fire in the grate crackled, and Dumbledore said something that Harry had not heard him say before in 4 years of proximity, something that seemed to come from a genuine and unguarded place rather than his usual carefully weighted territory. I'm sorry, Dumbledore said. For the ways this year has involved things being kept from you. For the ways I have sometimes treated the information around you as something to manage rather than something you deserved. Harry looked at him. Fleur was still beside him. I know, Harry said. I know you thought you were protecting something. He held Dumbledore's gaze. The thing is, we've handled everything you didn't tell us, and everything you did, and everything in between. I'd appreciate if the information sharing was more complete going forward. Dumbledore held his gaze. Agreed, he said. And then, with something that was real, you are an extraordinary pair. I don't say that to flatter. I say it because it's accurate and because you should know. They left the office and went down the spiral stairs and into the corridor. The castle was night quiet around them. He knows more than he said even now, Fleur said. Always, Harry said. But he said more tonight than he has all year. Crouch, Fleur said, and in the word was everything, the whole year of it, the managed distance and the calibrated information and the face wearing another man's life. He believes in what he's doing completely. That's what makes him dangerous. I know. Harry thought about Sirius's words. Devoted in the way that people who sacrificed everything for a cause are devoted. We can't appeal to his conscience or his self-interest. The only option in the maze is to stop him physically before he can execute the plan. 2 of us against 1 man who has been doing this for 9 months without being caught, Fleur said. Those are reasonable odds. There are odds, Harry said. Which is better than the alternative? She looked at him in the corridor, the torchlight doing its amber work on her face and hair. The bond between them had been loud all day, since the lake, since the shore, since the embrace that had not been managed and had not needed to be. It was loud now, present and warm and specific in the way it had become over weeks and months of proximity, carrying both of them, their shared weight distributed. The third task is 2 months away, she said. 2 months to prepare, he said. Then we prepare. She tilted her head slightly. You are not afraid of it. Are you? She thought about it. The pause she always gave herself to build a real answer rather than a reflexive one. No, she said, finally. Not afraid. Serious about it. She paused again. Serious and, She looked at him and through the bond the thing that had been moving arrived fully for the first time, said in the direct unsentimental way she said everything important. Not alone in it. The word landed with the specific weight of something said simply because it was true. No, he said. Neither am I. They went to their separate towers and separate dormitories and he lay awake for a while running through everything, Crouch, the maze, the port key, the graveyard at Little Hangleton that he hadn't been to and now knew he was going, and through it all the bond was steady, and Fleur's end of it was steady, and he thought about the lake and what she'd looked like on the bank with Gabrielle's arms around her neck and the fear leaving her face when she'd found him standing there. He thought, whatever is coming in 2 months, we are ready for it. Then he thought, I don't mean ready in the sense of prepared, though we're that too. I mean ready in the sense of, knowing what we're standing for. He slept. The next morning Gabrielle found him at breakfast alone. Fleur was at the Beauxbatons table, Hermione was in the library, and sat down across from him with the complete lack of social hesitation that was apparently a Delacour family trait. I wanted to say thank you, she said. In English, because you should understand it. Not just through Fleur. He looked at her. In the morning light she was clearly her sister's sister, the same direct quality, the same absolute lack of pretense, the silver blonde hair. She had Fleur's eyes but without the layers Fleur's had acquired, everything more surface, everything clearer. You don't need to, he said. I wanted to, she said. There is a difference. She folded her hands on the table in a way that was very precise and very 9 years old simultaneously. Fleur is my whole world, she said. Since our mother died. She worries about me every day. She doesn't show it but she does. She watched him. I think you know what it is to have someone worry about you every day. He thought about Hermione. About Sirius. Yeah, he said. I think, Gabrielle said, with the forensic confidence of someone who has done a lot of observation and reached a conclusion, that you are good for her. Not because of the magic thing. Because she is herself with you. She paused. She is not always herself with people. She has a version she shows when she is being, she searched for the word. Professional. This is not a bad thing. But with you she does not do the version. Harry didn't say anything. Okay, Gabrielle said. I just wanted to say it. She unclasped her hands and picked up a piece of toast from the Gryffindor table with the complete ease of someone who does not recognize that this belongs to other people's breakfast. Also, can I ask you about the basilisk? Fleur told me the second-year story and I think she was summarizing the impressive parts. He looked at her. She told you about the basilisk. She tells me everything, Gabrielle said. Eventually. He spent 20 minutes explaining the basilisk to Gabrielle, who listened with exactly the focused attention that Fleur listened with, and who asked follow-up questions that were more specific than most adults managed, and who at the end said, so you can talk to snakes, as though adding this to a file. Yes, he said. She nodded. Filed it. Picked up another piece of toast. Useful, she said. He thought, not for the first time, that Fleur had not fallen far from the family tree. Chapter 6, The Graveyard. And after the maze arrived in June like a held breath finally released. The Quidditch pitch had been transformed over the preceding weeks, the grass grown up into hedges 20 feet high, the transformation gradual enough that you could watch it happening from the castle windows, the familiar open space becoming something enclosed and navigable only from inside. Harry had watched it go up each morning from the dormitory window and had felt, not dread, but the particular focused readiness of someone who has been running toward a fixed point for a long time and can now see it. 2 months of preparation had produced specific things. He and Fleur had mapped every recorded version of the Triwizard maze from historical accounts, working out the common enchantments used, boggarts, blast-ended scroots, sphinxes, acromantula, various full-body jinxes and confusion charms. They'd practiced counter-jinxes until the counters were reflex rather than thought. They'd worked out a set of signals through the bond, not a formal system, but a fluency, a way of sending directional intent and alertness levels that had become as natural as speech. They'd also identified Barty Crouch Jr. not in a dramatic way, more in the way that something you've been looking at all year finally shows you its actual shape. The polyjuice timing was consistent. The specific type of information he'd given them in September, useful but bounded, never crossing into territory that would have let them identify him, matched the behavior of someone managing assets. And 3 weeks ago, late at night, Harry had watched from under his invisibility cloak while the person wearing Moody's face had stood in the empty defense classroom holding what was unmistakably a portkey and speaking to it in a low voice, not words Harry could fully catch, but the cadence of someone delivering final instructions to an inanimate object. He'd told Dumbledore the next morning. Dumbledore had listened with the quality of someone receiving information they'd been most of the way to possessing and was now fully confirming. He'd said, "Leave it until the maze. Moving too early will trigger contingencies we don't know about. In the maze, he'll be where we can address him directly." Harry had agreed, not because Dumbledore had the authority to require his agreement, but because the logic was sound. Crouch in the maze was crouch away from the castle's systems, away from students, in a controlled environment where any confrontation could be contained. Crouch extracted from the maze in whatever condition the confrontation produced him in was something that could be handed to the Ministry. He'd told Fleur. She'd looked at the plan with her evaluating eye and said, "Contingency if Dumbledore's containment fails." He'd said, "We don't let Harry touch the portkey." She'd said, "We don't let either of us touch the portkey." He'd said, "Agreed." The evening of the third task was warm in the particular way of early June evenings, the kind of warmth that has weight to it, golden-edged. The stands around the transformed pitch were packed with students and visiting families, and the noise was different from the first 2 tasks, more complex, carrying something the earlier events hadn't had, the awareness that this was the conclusion of something. The champions assembled at the maze entrance. The entrance was a gap in the hedge 20 feet wide, flanked by 2 professors and Bagman in his wasp's robes. Bagman was doing his thing, the cheerful narration, the crowd work, the performance of enthusiasm that Harry had spent the year finding more and more transparently hollow. He said the usual things: first to find the Triwizard Cup would be champion, the cup was at the center of the maze, points earned in previous tasks determined entry order. Harry went first. Then Cedric, 30 seconds behind. Then Crumb, 30 seconds after Cedric. Then Fleur, 30 seconds after Crumb. The gap between Harry and Fleur was 90 seconds. He didn't love this. He also understood that the entry order was the entry order and working around it was the plan's job. He looked at Fleur before going in. She was looking back, that direct, unsentimental look, nothing performed about it. Through the bond, steady, sharp, aimed. "I'm here. Go." He went in. The maze was louder than it looked from outside. Not loud with noise, loud with presence, the sense of something alive in the enclosed space, magic running through the hedges like a current. The torches set into the hedge walls at intervals made moving shadows of everything, and the path before him branched within the first 20 feet into 3 options that looked identical until you paid attention to the way the air moved. He went left. Then straight. Then right when the left path produced the crawling sensation of a confundus field that he identified by the mild disorientation at the threshold and stepped back from before it fully engaged. A boggart around the first corner, he dispatched it with a ridiculous before it finished forming, barely breaking pace. A blast-ended script 50 feet further, enormous and armored and moving with the mechanical aggression of a creature that had been magically enhanced into being irritable. He went over it, not around it. Wingardium Leviosa applied to himself rather than the creature, lifting him just enough to clear the carapace, dropping him back to the path running while it was still reorienting. He was moving fast, and moving fast was a choice. He wanted to reach the center before Crouch positioned himself for the execution of whatever the plan was, which meant outrunning the task itself as much as possible. The bond was at the edge of his awareness, present, tracking, not intrusive. He could feel Fleur somewhere behind him in the maze, her focus stayed clear and clean. She was moving fast too. He sent a pulse through the bond, bear right at junctions when possible, confundus fields on left branches. He had no idea if that transmitted or translated, but he felt a quality of acknowledgement from her direction that suggested something had gotten through. 20 minutes in, he heard Cedric. Not his voice, the sound of a spell, somewhere to his right in the hedges. A brief exchange, then silence. He assessed, Cedric was alive and moving, which was all he needed to know. 30 minutes in, he hit the Sphinx. It was sitting in the middle of a crossroads, lion-bodied and human-faced, watching him approach with the particular patience of something that is very old and has been given a specific purpose and is content with that purpose. "Answer my riddle and pass," it said. "Fail and I send you back." He recognized the riddle format from the historical accounts. He stopped, breathed, listened. The riddle was actually elegant, a four-part puzzle about the nature of something that's visible when hidden and hidden when visible. He worked through it. Shadow, he thought. No, shadow worked for the first three parts but broke on the fourth. He went back. The fourth part said, "I hold what you carry but keep nothing for myself." A mirror, then. That worked all four parts. "A mirror," he said. The Sphinx rose and moved aside, and he went through the crossroads and kept moving. At the 40-minute mark, he felt something change in the bond. It was abrupt, not painful, more like a sound cut off in the middle. Not Fleur's absence, her presence didn't disappear, but the quality shifted, something sharp and reactive that he associated with physical confrontation. He stopped. Sent through the bond, status. The return came in texture rather than words, handling it, fine, go, and then the quality settled back into focused forward motion. He went. He found the cup 20 feet before Crouch found him. The center of the maze opened into a clearing, circular, the hedges forming walls around it, and in the center on a raised stone plinth was the Triwizard cup. A cup, not a goblet. Smaller than the goblet of fire, gleaming with an enchantment that made the gold look wet and alive, rotating slowly on the plinth with no visible mechanism. He stopped at the clearing's edge. He felt it from 10 feet. The portkey energy radiating off the cup was distinct from the standard enchantments, a specific frequency that wasn't ambient magic but directed, targeted, pre-tuned to a destination. He could feel it the same way he felt the confundus fields at the maze's branching points, a wrongness at the edge, something that wanted to pull. He didn't step forward. He stood at the clearing's edge and looked at the cup and thought, Crouch isn't here yet, which means Crouch is coming, which means I wait. He waited. He felt Cedric enter the clearing from the opposite side 40 seconds later. They looked at each other across the plinth. "It's a portkey," Harry said, without preface. Cedric stopped. He was slightly winded, one sleeve torn at the shoulder, something in the maze had gotten close, but his eyes were sharp and his wand was up. He looked at the cup. "You're certain? The energy signature is wrong for a simple enchanted object." Harry kept his eyes moving, the clearing's edges, the hedges. "Someone modified it. It'll take whoever grabs it to a specific location." "Who modified it?" "The person who put my name in the goblet," Harry said. "He's in this maze and he'll be here in about 2 minutes." Cedric absorbed this with the speed of someone who has been quietly excellent all year and was not going to slow down now. "Plan. Don't touch the cup. When he arrives, we take him together." Cedric nodded once. He shifted his position to cover a different arc of the clearing's perimeter, which was exactly the right instinct, coverage, not clustering. Harry had always thought Cedric was better than his reputation gave him credit for, and this moment confirmed it. The hedge on the south edge of the clearing moved. Not the way hedges moved in wind, laterally, with intention, the branches parting and staying parted to let something through. The person who came through was wearing Moody's face and Moody's gait and carrying Moody's wand, but Harry saw through it now so completely that the face meant nothing. He just saw what was underneath the face, the specific intensity of someone who has believed in a single thing for years and is 20 feet from the culmination of that belief. Crouch Jr. looked at Harry. Then at Cedric. Something in his face recalculated. "You know," he said. "Not a question." His voice was different from Moody's, higher, younger underneath the magical vocal modification, and the inflection was wrong in a way that Harry had been noticing for months without being able to name. "All year," Harry said. Crouch Jr. looked at Harry with something that was, genuinely, not anger. More like sorrow of a particular kind, the sorrow of someone who had made a sacrifice that was supposed to mean something and was watching the meaning get complicated. "You were supposed to reach this," he said. "You were supposed to be here." "I know," Harry said. "You kept me alive through 2 tasks to get me here. You're extraordinary." Crouch said it with total sincerity, which was somehow worse than contempt would have been. "He knows what you are. He's always known. The bond, the power, the instinct. Do you have any idea what you could be, if, stupefy," said Harry. And simultaneously, from beside him, "Stupefy," said Cedric. 2 stunners, perfectly converged, crossing at the center in a flash of red that had twice the impact of either alone. Crouch Jr. had half a second of his mouth still forming the next word of his speech before both spells hit him and he went down hard and stayed down. The clearing was silent. Cedric lowered his wand. He looked at Harry. "You didn't let him finish." "He wasn't going to say anything useful," Harry said. "He was going to say something designed to slow me down." Cedric looked at the unconscious figure on the grass. Then at Harry. "Yeah." He let out a breath. "Yeah, you're right." He looked at the cup. "What do we do about that?" Harry thought for a moment. Then he walked to the plinth, took the cup by its base rather than its handle. The portkey activation would require a deliberate grip, not a glancing touch, and looked at the enchantment. He'd watched Hermione work the detection charm for portkeys 3 weeks ago and had asked her to show him the counter. She'd shown him twice and then made him practice it until she was satisfied. He cast it now. The enchantment on the cup shuddered and changed color, from the wet gold of the surface to a deep, sickly blue underneath that meant active portkey, and he applied the counter, careful and precise, and felt the portkey energy collapse. The blue died. The cup returned to ordinary gold. He set it back on the plinth. Cedric was watching him. "Where would it have taken you?" "Little Hangleton," Harry said. "Voldemort." The name landed in the clearing with its full weight and Cedric was quiet for a moment. "And the portkey's dead now," Cedric said. "And the portkey's dead now," Harry confirmed. From behind him, the hedge on the north edge of the clearing, came Fleur. She came through at speed, slightly out of breath, her outer robes torn at one side, wand in hand, and she took in the scene in approximately 2 seconds, Crouch Jr. On the ground, Harry and Cedric at the plinth, cup on its pedestal. She looked at Crouch. Then at Harry. He felt through the bond what she felt, a rapid-fire sequence of assessments resolving into accounted for, handled, both of you are intact, and then a settling quality that was relief doing its work. "You got him," she said. "We got him," Cedric said, with the particular generosity that was characteristic of him. Harry identified it. "I provided the second stunner." Fleur looked at Cedric. "Thank you," she said. "Crumb." Harry said. "I found him 2 junctions back, Imperiused. I broke the curse. He's behind me, slower." She was already crossing to Crouch. She cast a full-body bind on top of the stunner with the precise economy of someone who takes nothing on insufficient evidence, then a diagnostic charm, then a containment ward that Harry hadn't seen her cast before, something complex, multi-stage, that she executed in about 8 seconds. "Old French binding technique," she said, without looking up. "Preministry. It holds through most reversal attempts." She straightened. "He's not going anywhere." Cedric was looking at her with open admiration. "Where did you learn that?" "Beaux Batons has a comprehensive dark counter-curse program," she said. "The curriculum here is," she stopped. "I'll say it is less comprehensive." "It's genuinely terrible," Cedric said, agreeably. Crumb appeared at the hedge gap, moving under his own power but carefully, the specific careful movement of someone who has had their own volition removed and returned and is reorienting. He saw Crouch on the ground and stopped. He looked at Harry. "How long?" "All year," Harry said. Crumb closed his eyes for a moment. "Opened them." "The first task." "He gave me information about the dragon formation." "He gave all of us information," Harry said. "He was managing us." Crumb nodded slowly. "He gave me better formation data than you." He said it without satisfaction, just as a fact being evaluated. "He wanted me to do well in the early tasks and then fall behind in the final one. To reduce the probability of you reaching the cup simultaneously with me," Harry said. "Yes." Crumb looked at the contained figure on the ground. "He underestimated you." "I think he underestimated both of you." He looked at Fleur. "I did as well. Initially." He said this in the direct way he said everything, not apologetically, just as honest accounting. "Most people do," Fleur said. "Not a mistake, I'll repeat," Crumb said. The four of them stood in the cleared center of the maze in the early June evening, the sounds of the crowd somewhere beyond the hedges, the contained figure of Barty Crouch Jr. Motionless on the grass, the Triwizard Cup sitting on its plinth with its portkey dead and its gold ordinary, and Harry thought, this is the end of the thing that started in September and it ended here, in this clearing, with two simultaneous stunners and a countercharm and an old French binding technique. It ended before it became what it was meant to become. That was the whole point. Dumbledore came through the hedge gap 4 minutes later with McGonagall and 2 Aurors, moving with a speed that suggested he'd been watching the maze from outside and had been tracking the clearing for exactly this outcome. He saw Crouch. He stopped. He looked at Harry. Harry met his eyes and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. Dumbledore looked, for just a moment, like a man who has been carrying a weight for a very long time and has felt it shift, not gone, not resolved, just redistributed, shared with people who turned out to be capable of sharing it. "Well done," he said. And this time it had no agenda behind it at all. What followed was loud and complicated and lasted several hours. The Aurors took Crouch. The polyjuice wore off when they removed his flask, which it would do without the regular dose, and the face underneath was younger than Harry had expected, a man in his 30s, hollow-cheeked from years of Azkaban and its aftermath, still with the specific intensity that had been legible even through Moody's features. He was conscious when they took him, and he looked at Harry once with those devoted burning eyes and said nothing. The real Moody was found in a trunk in his own office, alive, bewildered, deeply unimpressed about the entire situation, and requiring several days in the hospital wing before he was fully himself. Harry visited him once. Moody looked at him and said, "Heard you got the Crouch boy with a stunner," before he finished his speech. "Yes," Harry said. "Good," Moody said. Speeches in dark situations are almost always delay tactics. "That's what I thought," Harry said. "You thought right," Moody said, and rolled over and went back to sleep. The Ministry descended on Hogwarts over the following 24 hours with the organized chaos of an institution that has been surprised by facts and is scrambling to reconstruct a narrative around them. Fudge arrived in person, which Harry had expected, and spent 3 hours being briefed by Dumbledore in the headmaster's office, which Harry heard about through Hermione, who had sources. Fudge's position, Hermione reported, was that the Crouch situation was a containable incident and that there was no evidence Voldemort had been directly involved in planning it. Crouch could have been acting on residual devotion to a dead cause rather than on active instruction. Harry listened to this and then said to Hermione, "He doesn't want it to be true." "No," she said. "He doesn't." "And Dumbledore?" "Dumbledore is saying everything is true," Hermione said. Calmly. Repeatedly. With documentation. She paused. "He's also saying that you and Fleur prevented a physical resurrection attempt that would have resulted in Voldemort's full return. Is Fudge receiving that?" Hermione's expression said what she thought of that. "He's receiving it in the way a man receives news he's decided to reject." Harry wasn't surprised. He was also, he found, not particularly invested in Fudge's decision to reject reality. The portkey was dead. Crouch was in Ministry custody. Voldemort was not in a graveyard in Little Hangleton with a new body. Those were facts, and the Ministry's feelings about facts were not Harry's problem. His problem, which was not actually a problem so much as a thing that needed to be said clearly, was Fleur. He found her the morning after the task on the grounds, near the lake. Not by accident, through the bond, which had become so fluent over the year that finding each other was now less a process and more a reflex. She was sitting near the water with her shoes off and her feet in the grass, which was the most unguarded physical position he'd seen her in, and she looked up when he came near with the expression that was simply her face when it wasn't doing anything in particular. Not performing. Just her. He sat down next to her. The lake was the summer version, blue and easy in the morning light, completely different from the February gray of the second task. It looked like it had nothing to do with Grindylows or sleeping hostages or the cold that had come off it in waves when he'd surfaced with Ron and Gabrielle in his arms. "Crumb is leaving today," Fleur said. "I know. I spoke to him this morning." He'd found Crumb in the entrance hall with his trunk, and Crumb had looked at him and said, in the direct way, "You are going to be someone I respect for a long time. I'm not sure what that looks like practically." And Harry had said, "Write letters," and Crumb had nodded and said, "I will," and that had been a friendship established in about 40 seconds. "Cedric's family came last night," Fleur said. "His father was," she paused. "His father was very relieved. In the way that parents who have been managing fear in public find a private moment to stop managing it. He was fine," Harry said. "Cedric was fine the whole time." "Yes. But his father didn't know that from outside the maze." Harry thought about what it would be like to watch someone you loved go into something you couldn't follow them into and not know the outcome. He thought about Sirius, probably somewhere reading about the third task in whatever publication reached him. He'd send a letter today. "Yeah," he said. They sat for a moment. The morning was warm and the grass was still damp from the night, and in the distance some of the castle's breakfast noise drifted out through open windows. "Fleur," he said. "Yes. You're going back to Beauxbatons." She looked at him. "In 3 weeks," she said. "When the school year ends." "And the bond," he stopped. Not because the sentence was wrong but because he wanted to say it right. "The bond doesn't care about geography. I've known that since September, but I'm saying it because I want to be clear that I know it." She was watching him with that direct look. Through the bond the quality was open, unmanaged, the door he'd felt unlock at Christmas standing fully open now, nothing held at careful distance. "I know you know it," she said. "I'm also saying," he continued, "that regardless of the bond, regardless of the magic and the recognition and the goblet and all of it, I would want to know you. Specifically. As a person." He looked at her. "That part has nothing to do with old magic." She was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was building a real answer. Around them the morning continued its business, birds, distant castle sounds, the water making small noises against the bank. "When I was selected as the Beauxbatons champion," she said, "Madame Maxime told me I had the skills and the intelligence to win. She also told me that the thing most likely to prevent me from winning was not another champion but my own expectation that people would underestimate me and the energy I wasted being frustrated by it." She paused. She was right. "I came here expecting to be underestimated. And most people did underestimate me." She turned to look at him directly. "You never did. Not from the first night. You made it difficult to underestimate you," he said. "Most people find it very easy." She looked at the lake. "My grandmother said the bond was a recognition of compatibility. I thought when she said it that it sounded like something designed to make arranged magic sound less arbitrary." A pause. "I no longer think it sounds arbitrary." He let that settle. "No," he said. "Neither do I." She turned back to him and through the bond the warmth was complete and unheld, the quality of something that had been moving toward a destination for 9 months and had arrived, not dramatically, not with the sudden resolution of a dramatic moment, but in the way that most real things resolve, gradually and then all at once, sitting by a lake on a June morning with damp grass underfoot. She leaned over and kissed him. It was brief and unperformed and completely her, no announcement, no preamble, no theatrical moment. Something decided and acted on with the same clean efficiency with which she did everything. When she pulled back she was looking at him with those gray eyes at close range, and the bond was doing something he'd never felt before, a quality that wasn't amplified warmth or heightened resonance but something more like completion. A chord that had been working toward its fourth note finding it. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he agreed. And then letters. And then the summer, and then next year, and then, he stopped. We work it out. She looked at him for one more moment, then looked back at the lake, and they sat there in the morning with the summer coming and the year behind them and everything that came next ahead of them, and neither of them was afraid of it. Dumbledore gave the end-of-year speech in the Great Hall with all 4 schools present for the last time, and he said things that were true and things that were carefully framed, and one thing that was simply said, that 4 young people had demonstrated this year that preparation and courage and the willingness to work together were not merely admirable qualities but genuinely sufficient ones, and that this was worth remembering in times that would require it. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table and looked at the high table and thought about the word sufficient. Yeah. Sufficient. Not invulnerable, not untouchable, not operating beyond the reach of fear or loss or the grinding difficulty of things that were genuinely hard. Just sufficient, capable and honest and not alone. He looked across the hall to where Fleur sat at the Beauxbatons table, and she was looking back at him, and through the bond between them the warmth was steady and complete, running between them like a current between 2 points that have found their alignment. Hermione, beside him, was writing something in a notebook. Probably documentation. Hermione documented everything, which was why Harry's entire 4th year was going to be very accurately recorded somewhere. Ron was eating. This was, Harry thought, the most consistent fact of his friendship with Ron. Whatever else was happening, Ron ate, and the normalcy of it was its own kind of comfort. Neville was telling Parvati something about a herbology project, and Parvati was genuinely listening, and Neville had the particular quality of a person discovering that other people found his interests interesting. Cedric, at the Hufflepuff table, caught Harry's eye one final time and raised his goblet in a small salute. Harry raised his. That was enough. The train home was the Hogwarts Express in the way it always was, the smell of the compartment, the landscape moving past the windows, the specific feeling of a year concluding. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione in their compartment and they talked about things that were normal and things that weren't, and Hermione made Ron explain twice why he hadn't sent her a proper letter all year, which he found difficult and she found instructive. Fleur's compartment was further back in the train, and through the bond he was aware of her, reading, probably, or talking with the other Beauxbatons students, the warm presence of her familiar now as the sound of his own heartbeat. He looked out the window at the countryside going by. He thought about the year, the goblet, the announcement, the bond. The library evenings and the ballroom practice and the lake in February. The maze and the 2 simultaneous stunners and crouch on the grass. Voldemort, still out there, still not gone, the problem deferred rather than resolved. He thought about what was coming. Not with dread, with the same focused readiness he'd had looking at the maze entrance. The world was moving towards something and he was in it, and that wasn't something he'd chosen or would choose differently. It was just what was true. He had people. That was new. Not new as in recent, he'd had people for years, Ron and Hermione, Sirius, Neville, Cedric, but new as in the quantity had changed. The quality had changed. He had Fleur, who was 3 compartments back and a permanent presence, woven into his life by magic older than Hogwarts and by choice made in parallel with that magic, because choice was what you added to destiny to make it yours. He had enough. At the platform, with the families crowding in and the noise of arrivals and the Beauxbatons students gathered near the front of the train for their separate transport, Fleur found him in the crowd. She was carrying a bag and her outer robes were off, summer clothes in their place, and she moved through the platform crowd with the same quality she moved through every space, like she knew where she was going and the crowd was optional. She stopped in front of him. They were in public, which she was entirely aware of, and she looked at him with her direct look and said, "Write. First letter in 3 days," he said. "I'll write first," she said. "Because you'll wait a week deciding what to say and 3 days is more efficient." "That's accurate," he said. "I know it is." The corner of her mouth moved. "Stay safe this summer. You too." She picked up her bag. She started to move toward the transport gathering point and then stopped, which was something she didn't usually do. Fleur had never stopped mid-movement in his presence without a specific reason. She turned back. "Harry." "Yeah." She looked at him across the few feet of crowded platform. "The goblet did something extraordinary," she said. "But the thing it recognized," she gestured, a small gesture that encompassed something too large for simple gesture. "That was already there. I want you to know I believe that." The platform was London and summer and people going in every direction, and through the bond between them the warmth was a full clean constant note. "Yeah," he said. "I know. I believe it too." She nodded. She went. He watched her go and then turned and found Ron and Hermione waiting with their trunks, Ron with his expression of someone who has decided to be very normal about everything, Hermione with her expression of someone who has been watching and wants him to know she's been watching but is being restrained about it. "All right," said Ron. "Better than that," Harry said. They went through the barrier to the Muggle world, the three of them, into the noise and light of King's Cross, and behind them the train was steaming in the station and somewhere the summer was just beginning, and Voldemort was not gone and the Ministry was not ready and the world was moving toward things that would require everything Harry had. He was ready for them. He was not alone in being ready. That, he thought, was enough to begin.